Chapter 42. Everyone was speechless. The Crown Prince, who had always liked cleanliness and could not bear to see anything that was not neat, would actually personally help a girl who had been whipped until she was covered in blood. Moreover, she was a girl who was called the number one trash. Hu Jichang's face turned pale again. Ji Yunhao's face was also ugly. How could his brother, who had always pursued perfection, be so nice to a trash? His gaze was fixed on Ji Yunhuang's hand that was supporting Ning Xuemo. His eyes were filled with uncertainty. When he saw Ji Yunhuang carrying Ning Xuemo, he paused and walked forward with a medicine bottle in his hand. A pill was rolling in the bottle. Xuemo, this is for treating whip wounds. Actually, I did not mean to hit you. It's just that it's just that what? Ji Yunhuang interrupted. His voice was calm, but it shocked Ji Yunhao. He calmed himself down and coughed. Just as he was about to explain, Hu Daichang impatiently said, "Reporting to your highness, it's just that she was too arrogant. She even insulted the imperial family. She should be taught a lesson." Ji Yunhuang glanced at her and lightly said, "Who taught you these rules? How can a commoner like you interrupt when the Crown Prince is speaking?" Hu Daichang choked. Although she was the marshal's daughter, she did not have an official title. She was indeed a commoner. This Crown Prince seemed to have a good temper, but he was not lenient when he needed to. If someone really provoked him, even if it was the imperial uncle, he would still beat them up. The emperor had personally given him an imperial edict that gave him the right to act first and report later. Hu Daichang naturally did not dare to provoke him. Although she was unwilling, she still retreated. Ji Yunhao was also somewhat embarrassed. His hand was still stretched out, but Ning Xuemo did not even look at him. Of course, she did not have the intention to take the medicine bottle either. He sheepishly withdrew his hand and replied to Ji Yunhuang, "Brother Wang, you don't know. Just now, Xuemo was spouting nonsense and slandering me and Miss Hu. I didn't want to see her continue making mistakes, so I taught her a lesson. Slander you." Ji Yunhuang smiled faintly. "So you're saying that Miss Hu is not pregnant?" This. Ji Yunhao paused for a moment. Just as he was about to clench his teeth and deny it, he suddenly saw the figure of an imperial physician among the surrounding guests. His Crown Prince brother was about to wave to that imperial physician. He took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Brother Wang, this is my fault." It was this younger brother who was unable to control his emotions that day and made a mistake. However, I will marry her. In these 2 days, this younger brother was going to ask Imperial Father for forgiveness and ask Imperial Father to grant the marriage. "Royal Brother, this matter implicates the royal family's decency. I beg Royal Brother to let it go for now." Ji Yunhuang's expression turned cold. "No matter what, since this matter is true, then it can't be considered as Xuemo slandering you. Why did you act so ruthlessly to kill her?" Little brother was just angry at the moment, and seeing that a little girl like her was speaking nonsense, I wanted to teach her a lesson. I didn't want to take her life. Just now, it was just a slip of the hand. You are not her father or brother. What right do you have to teach her a lesson? Little brother, after all, little brother was once her fiancé. That's right, it was once. It was only once. Sixth brother, you have already broken off the engagement with her. She has nothing to do with you anymore. You don't have the right to meddle in her affairs anymore. Ji Yunhuang indifferently threw out these words. He carried Ning Xuemo and walked out. Ji Yunhao looked at Ning Xuemo obediently lying in Ji Yunhuang's arms. Chapter 43. Ji Yunhao looked at Ning Xuemo obediently lying in Ji Yunhuang's arms. He clenched his fists under his sleeves and his eyes darkened. He took 2 steps forward and said, "Xuemo, this kind of whip wound can only be cured by my special medicine. Ning Xuemo lifted her small face from Ji Yunhuang's shoulder and opened her small hands towards Ji Yunhao. Did she just forgive him? She was willing to accept his medicine. Ji Yunhao was delighted and quickly handed the pill to her. Half of this pill should be applied externally and the other half should be taken orally. Pooh! With a soft sound, the pill was crushed by Ning Xuemo and turned into powder. She opened her palm and blew on it. The powder flew out and almost landed on Ji Yunhao's face. Ji Yunhao was speechless. Ning Xuemo's thin lips slightly hooked up. Ji Yunhao, this time we're definitely enemies. I hope your skin is tough enough to withstand my counterattack. Ji Yunhao looked at her being carried by Ji Yunhuang into a low-key yet luxurious carriage. His heart inexplicably turned cold and he shivered. Your Highness. Hu Daichang walked over and her voice was filled with unwillingness. Your Highness, are we just going to let this slut off like this? She still had the smell of urine on her. Ji Yunhao took 2 steps to the side and said indifferently, Daichang, you're still a noble lady. Calling this slut this and that, aren't you afraid that it will lower your status? He turned around and left with large strides. He suddenly felt some regret in his heart. It was as if he had picked up a sesame seed and lost a watermelon. Hu Daichang was choked by his words and her face turned red. She usually tried her best to pretend to be a virtuous lady in front of Ji Yunhao. Her voice was soft and gentle, and she had never said anything bad. But because she met Ning Xuemo, every time she saw this little girl, she would remember her lowly status in the past. She didn't want to think about how Ning Xuemo had given her a new lease of life back then. She only wanted to think about how her ugliest side had been exposed in front of that little girl. Every time she saw Ning Xuemo, she felt very uncomfortable. Only by ruthlessly trampling on Ning Xuemo could she feel better. That little slut, she was already as lowly as dust, but she actually made such a big fool of herself today. The grudge between her and her was set. If she didn't kill her, she wouldn't be human. She clenched her fists tightly, as if she was clenching Ning Xuemo's slender neck. Xuemo, you shouldn't have destroyed that pill. After all, that was the only antidote for this whip wound. The luxurious carriage was spacious and well-equipped. Ning Xuemo was placed on a snow-white brocade quilt. The brocade quilt was as soft as the clouds, and Ning Xuemo was comfortable lying on it. Ji Yunhuang sat opposite her. Ning Xuemo lowered her head to check the wound on her arm. She faintly said, I don't want that scum's things. I can make the antidote myself. She had the residue of the antidote on her hand, and she could smell its composition just by smelling it. Ji Yunhuang's eyes lit up. You can actually make that kind of antidote? According to what he knew, the antidote for Ji Yunhao's soul-breaking whip was a secret of the imperial family. In this world, only the palace's secret pharmacist could make it. Moreover, he was the only one who knew the prescription. There were many doctors who wanted to get their hands on the prescription, but none of them had succeeded. This little girl only crushed an antidote pill, and she was able to make it. Ning Xuemo didn't answer him. She took the brocade handkerchief beside her and wiped her hands clean. She used her hand to support her chin and looked at Ji Yunhuang with a smile. Chapter 44. Ning Xuemo did not answer him. She took a handkerchief from the side and wiped her hands clean. She used her hand to support her chin and looked at Ji Yunhuang with a smile. Your Highness, are you interested in the antidote? Why don't I tell you the method to refine the antidote as a reward for saving my life? Ji Yunhuang's eyes flashed and he smiled slightly. This prince is not interested in the antidote. As long as Miss can refine the antidote to cure the poison in your body, it will be fine. He already had a faint understanding of this little fox's temperament. She seemed to be cunning, but she was someone who clearly distinguished between gratitude and grudges. She would repay kindness and hatred and did not like to owe people favors, therefore, it was better for her to owe him a favor. Boring. Feeling bored, Ning Xuemo turned over. However, she forgot about her injuries for a moment. This movement affected the wounds on her body, causing her to hiss lightly. She pursed her lips and endured the pain. Beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. Ji Yunhuang looked at her slightly pale face. He knew the pain of this kind of whip wound. Even a 7-foot-tall man would be in so much pain that he could not help but groan. This little girl could actually endure it and not make a sound. She could even laugh out loud. What kind of living environment could force her to endure this kind of pain? He had already investigated the matters in Marquis Ning Jingyuan's residence. He knew that Ning Xuemo had lived a difficult life these past few years and was often bullied by others. He was not surprised that she could endure hardships, but to be able to endure pain, it was somewhat out of his expectations. It made him admire her in his heart. Originally, he was only interested in her medical skills and her strange qigong. But now, he was interested in her as a person. Seeing her pursing her pale lips to endure the pain, he actually felt a kind of heartache. Heartache. Ji Yunhuang was secretly shocked. Even he felt heartache. He was a rare genius. No matter what he learned, he was able to learn it quickly. However, he had a flaw. He did not have any feelings. Although he looked as gentle as jade, he was indifferent to everyone. That year, when his mother, who loved him dearly, passed away, he did not feel any heartache or pain. His imperial father said that he was born to be a ruler. A ruler should be emotionless and should not be influenced by feelings. Only then could he be iron-blooded and just. Only then could he be a good ruler. However, he still had some regrets in his heart. He didn't expect that he would have this kind of feeling after seeing Ning Xuemo today. This kind of feeling was unavoidably novel to him. He looked at Ning Xuemo in a daze. Ning Xuemo thought that no matter how painful the whip wound was, it would only hurt for a while. As long as she could endure it, she would be fine. However, she did not expect that after an hour had passed, the pain from the whip did not lessen. Instead, it seemed to have worsened, causing her to be unable to rest in peace. Ji Yunhuang watched as more and more sweat appeared on her forehead. He seemed to have thought of something and said, "That's right, I forgot to tell you. If you don't use the special antidote for this kind of whip wound, it will continue to hurt and will never stop." Ning Xuemo, fuck. Why didn't you say so earlier? No wonder when she crushed that pill and blew it all over that scumbag Ji Yunhao's face, that guy was still so calm and collected. He had an expression that said he was certain she would go back and beg him. So it was because of this. If she had known earlier, she would have taken his antidote first to relieve the pain. When the whip wound was healed, she would have gone to beat him until his face was full of peach blossoms. That way, she would have been able to vent the anger in her heart instead of seeking a momentary satisfaction. Could it be that she had to continue to be in pain while concocting the antidote? Damn it, she was in so much pain that she wanted to beat someone up. She simply could not calm her heart down. Chapter 45. Ji Yunhuang looked at her wrinkled little face and guessed what she was thinking. Why don't you follow me back to the Crown Prince's residence first? I'll send someone to ask Sixth Brother for the antidote. No one would refuse to give face to the Crown Prince, especially Ji Yunhao. This was not a bad idea. She was in so much pain that she was sweating all over. If she did not endure it, her fingers would be trembling. It would be extremely difficult for her to concoct the antidote in this state. Ning Xuemo nodded. I'll have to trouble your highness. Although she said those words calmly, her lips were already trembling. Ji Yunhuang looked at her for a moment and lifted his sleeve to wipe away the sweat on her forehead. You're still a child. If you're in pain, you should shout it out. Even if you cry, why do you have to endure it? Ning Xuema stared blankly for a moment. In her previous life, she had been trained to endure pain. Therefore, although she often acted cute and killed people, she almost never cried. No matter how painful it was, she would quietly endure it. After enduring it for so long, she almost forgot what it felt like to cry. In her mind, crying was a sign of cowardice. Unless it was to prevent other people from crying, Ji Yunhuang's words made her heart feel warm. This crown prince, no matter what reason he had for being good to her, he was still concerned about her. She curled her lips and smiled, revealing 2 dimples on her cheeks. Many thanks for your highness' concern, but I don't want to cry. She wanted to beat Ji Yunhao into a pig's head even more. Ji Yunhuang bent his finger and lightly flicked her forehead. You don't mean what you say. Why are you so stubborn? This action was unavoidably too intimate. All the hairs on Ning Xuema's body stood erect. She calmly moved backwards. Although Ji Yunhuang did not return to Chongkong country often, his residence was still the most majestic among all the prince's residences. Of course, compared to Ning Xuema's Marquis Jingyuan's residence, it was much more superior. The carriage drove straight in. Ning Xuema could not see the interior of the crown prince's residence from inside the carriage, but she could hear the sound of people kneeling and greeting. She could imagine the size of the residence. After the carriage entered the mansion, it continued to move forward for a full quarter of an hour before stopping. Welcome back, Your Highness the Crown Prince. A chorus of greetings came from outside. From the sound of it, there were at least 100 people. Xuema, it's not convenient for you to move right now. This prince will carry you down. Ji Yunhuang didn't give her any chance to protest and carried her in his arms. A servant respectfully lifted the curtain of the sedan. Ji Yunhuang carried Ning Xuema and walked out of the sedan in large strides. There were 2 rows of people kneeling below. One row was made up of maids, and the other row was made up of servants. The one leading them was a butler in luxurious clothes. Ning Xuema lay in Ji Yunhuang's embrace, and she could feel countless gazes on her body. She didn't need to look to know that those gazes were filled with shock and astonishment. Who asked their crown prince to carry a legendary piece of trash in his arms? But she did not hear the low hiss of surprise in the tea house. It seemed that the rules of the crown prince's residence were pretty good. Her body was in unbearable pain and she really could not stand on her own. She simply laid her head on his chest and waited for him to carry her in. In any case, he had already carried her in the tea house. Since it was an emergency, carrying once was carrying twice was also carrying. She was a modern person, so she did not care about this. Ning Xuema heard Ji Yunhuang instructing the servants. She knew that he would not harm her at this time, so she was too lazy to listen. Your Highness, let us servants carry this young lady. For maids carried a spring stool over, wanting to take Ning Xuema from Ji Yunhuang's arms. Chapter 46. No need. Ji Yunhuang did not even look at the bench as he carried Ning Xuema and walked in. Everyone looked at Ji Yunhuang's back and were so shocked that their jaws almost fell to the ground. The crown prince, who had never been close to women, personally carried a young girl back. What was even more shocking was that he actually carried the young girl back to his own palace, the crown prince's palace. Didn't he never allow any women to enter? What kind of sacred being was this girl? Countless people looked at Imo Chi, the personal shadow guard who followed the crown prince out today. Imo Chi's handsome face did not have any expression. He was not a gossipy person, especially when it came to the crown prince. It was not something he could spread around. He turned around and disappeared. He was a shadow guard and would not easily show himself. If it was not for the fact that the crown prince needed him to drive the carriage, he would not have shown himself. Ning Xuemo did not know that the room she was currently sleeping in was Ji Yunhuang's sleeping quarters. She laid on the soft, fragrant blanket and inadvertently swept her eyes over the room's decorations. 4 words popped up in her mind: taste, immortal qi. The room was mainly decorated in black and white. There was an ink landscape painting on the bed curtains and a black and white marble screen. There was a marble bonsai on the white jade table. There was a mist rising from the bonsai. The mist was quiet and the fragrance was far away, making people feel relaxed and happy. Ning Xuemo lightly breathed in. This fragrance was not bad, it actually had an analgesic effect. As she laid here, the pain from the whip wounds on her body seemed to have lessened. Ning Xuemo casually looked around and knew that although the things in the room looked ordinary, they were not cheap. She could not find them in the market. Xuemo, you should stay here for now. The person who went to the 6th prince's palace to ask for the antidote will be back soon. Ji Yunhuang tucked her in. Today, the crown prince was not just gentle to her. Ning Xuemo coughed. Thank you, crown prince. She looked around the room again and sincerely praised. I did not expect that a guest room could be decorated so elegantly. As expected of the crown prince's palace, it's really rich. Ji Yunhuang slightly paused and coughed. This is my palace, ah. Ning Xuemo widened her eyes. There's a refreshing fragrance here that can alleviate your pain. Ji Yunhuang continued to explain. So that was how it was. Ning Xuemo glanced at the marble bonsai on the long table. It turned out that it was actually a kind of strange fragrance. However, if he arranged for her to stay in the guest room, he could also move the bonsai there, right? You can't touch this bonsai. Ji Yunhuang was an understanding person, so he explained. Ning Xuemo understood and nodded. Thank you very much. This crown prince was really warm-hearted. Even his sleeping quarters were given to her. Ji Yunhuang suddenly extended his finger and lightly tapped her head. You don't have to think too much. You're still a child, what can I do to you? Don't worry. Ning Xuemo. Big brother, I didn't think too much about it, Your Highness, the 6th prince requests an audience. A guard reported from outside. Ji Yunhuang slightly frowned. He had only sent someone to ask Ji Yunhao for the antidote. Why did Ji Yunhao personally come? Xuemo, you rest here first. This prince will go out and take a look. He walked out in large strides. In the living room, Ji Yunhao sat in the guest's seat while a maid served him tea. Ji Yunhao tried to ask, where is His Highness the Crown Prince? 6th Prince, please wait. Someone has already gone to report. Chapter 47. 6th Prince, please wait a moment. Someone has already gone to report. The maids in the Crown Prince's residence were all shrewd. They did not directly answer Ji Yunhao's question. Ji Yunhao smiled faintly. While receiving the tea, he touched the maid's hand. With a flip of his wrist, a round bead was placed in the maid's palm. In a soft voice, he said, "Many thanks, Mississippi. This prince admires Mrs. Pure Heart." The maid was slightly startled and her face turned red. Ji Yunhao's appearance was handsome, and when he smiled, his eyes were extremely captivating, causing her young maiden's heart to involuntarily skip a beat. She calmly withdrew her small hand, and the pearl in her palm had already been transferred to her sleeve. His Highness and the new girl are in the palace. They should be here soon. The maid added. Ji Yunhao's fingers that were holding the teacup tightened. His older brother the Crown Prince actually arranged for Ning Xuemo to be in his palace. Why? What was his older brother the Crown Prince planning? He felt even more uncomfortable, as if he was sitting on pins and needles. He wished he could immediately get up and rush to Ji Yunhuang's palace. While he was fidgeting, the sound of light and heavy footsteps could be heard at the door. "Old Six, why did you come here personally?" Ji Yunhuang appeared and walked in. Ji Yunhao stood up and bowed. "Third brother." Ji Yunhuang waved his hand. "There is no need for such formalities in our own home. You can just give the antidote to my imperial bodyguard." "Why did you come here personally?" Little brother heard her. "I couldn't bear it, so I came to see how she is." "How is she?" "It's not like you don't know the effects of your whip." "Old Six, it's not that I want to criticize you, but how could you be so ruthless towards a little girl?" Little brother was so angry at that time that I became muddle-headed. In a moment of anger. Little brother knows his mistake. Ji Yunhao lowered his head. His soul-breaking whip was a magic tool. It was one of the top 5 weapons in Chongkong country. Not only could it injure the body, it could also injure the soul. It could make people feel as if their soul was being torn apart. Ji Yunhao's temper was not good. His whip had injured countless people who disobeyed him. He would usually wait for people to be in so much pain that they were hovering between life and death. Then, he would decide whether to give the antidote based on that person's attitude. Even the most rebellious of men would be docile after he had whipped them once. Because if he angered him again and got whipped a second time, it would hurt even more and the pain would last longer. Of course, there were also those who were born stubborn and refused to admit their mistakes and died from the pain. He whipped Ning Xuema in the tea house because he was angry and wanted to teach her a lesson. Secondly, he wanted her to completely bow down to him and listen to his every word. If she listened to him in the future, he could even take her in as a concubine. Initially, he couldn't wait to kick this girl far away and stop pestering him. But now, he didn't want her to fall into someone else's hands and blossom beside someone else. His calculations were not bad, but he never thought that he would meet Ji Yunhuang there. What was even more unexpected was that the crown prince would personally carry someone away. This made him feel a sense of crisis. Ji Yunhuang faintly glanced at him and saw through his thoughts. However, he was too lazy to expose him. He stretched out his hand and said, "Give me the antidote." Ji Yunhuang's appearance was gentle, but his aura was strong. Ji Yunhao did not dare to disobey and could only take out a porcelain bottle. He was still unwilling to give up. "This antidote is a little special. Why don't you let little brother personally apply the antidote?" Chapter 48. All these years, you used the soul-breaking whip to injure a total of 1248 people. Did you personally apply the medicine on all of them? Ji Yunhuang's voice was neither warm nor angry, but it made Ji Yunhao break out in cold sweat. He did not expect that his elder brother, who did not seem to care about worldly affairs, would actually investigate him so thoroughly. He awkwardly handed the porcelain bottle to Ji Yunhuang. Younger brother was just thinking that since she is younger brother's fiancée, it would be unreasonable for others to apply medicine on her. You and her have already broken off the engagement. You no longer have anything to do with her. Ji Yunhuang took the medicine and turned to leave. Younger brother has something to say, but I don't know if I should say it. Ji Yunhao did not give up. Since you don't know if you should say it, then don't say it. Ji Yunhuang was too lazy to talk nonsense with him and walked out in large strides. "Third brother, after all, she was once engaged to me. Even if the engagement was broken off, it could not cover up this fact. If third brother still has any thoughts about her, I'm afraid you will be ridiculed by the common people." Ji Yunhao simply said it all in one breath. Ji Yunhuang slowly turned around, his handsome face unable to discern whether he was happy or angry. What thoughts does this prince have towards her? Ji Yunhao choked, but his heart relaxed. Listening to his third brother's tone, it seemed that he did not have any thoughts about that girl. He bowed and said, "Younger brother misspoke. With third brother's prestige, how could you have any thoughts about that little girl? The maids in third brother's residence are also more noble than her." "Oh, that's right, third brother, I know that you only pity her, but arranging for her to recuperate in your palace is still somewhat inappropriate. I thought that you would casually give her a guest room." He had not finished speaking when Ji Yunhuang interrupted him. "Do I need you to teach me how to arrange her?" Ji Yunhao choked on his words. Ji Yunhuang's gaze swept across the hall and he said indifferently, "Who was the talkative one?" There were a total of 4 maids in the hall. Hearing his words, they all knelt down. The maid serving tea was so frightened that her soul almost left her body. Her body trembled. "If one of you does not confess, all of you will be punished." Ji Yunhuang said 8 more words. The other 3 made 6 pairs of eyes simultaneously looked at the maid serving tea. The maidservant knew that she couldn't escape, so she knelt down and begged for mercy. "Your Highness, please calm down. It was a slip of the tongue. I know my mistake." Ji Yunhuang extended his hand towards Ji Yunhao. Soul-breaking whip. Ji Yunhao didn't dare to refuse and could only hand over the golden whip to Ji Yunhuang. Paw! Paw! As the golden light flickered, 3 bloody whip marks appeared on the maidservant's body. The maid rolled on the ground in pain and couldn't help but wail. Her mournful screams made the others tremble in fear. They lay on the ground and didn't dare to raise their heads. Ji Yunhuang threw the whip to Ji Yunhao. "Old 6, she was punished because of you. You can give her the antidote, but after giving her the antidote, don't call me your brother anymore." He turned around and strode out the door. Just as he was about to reach the door, he turned around and said indifferently, "She is the daughter of the late Marquis Jinyuan. She deserves everyone's respect. Don't compare her to a maid." With that last sentence, he had already disappeared. Ji Yunhao was left out in the cold. He felt rather awkward and his handsome face turned red. The maid who was beaten had already fainted from the pain. She desperately crawled to his feet and pulled on his robe. "Your Highness, please save me. Please give me the antidote." Ji Yunhao kicked her away in disgust and said to the housekeeper at the door, "I will take my leave now. Please say goodbye to His Highness the Crown Prince." Chapter 49. The housekeeper naturally replied with a few polite words and sent Ji Yunhao away. The maid was still rolling on the ground, screaming in pain until her voice was hoarse. "Someone come, throw her out." The housekeeper ordered someone to drag the maid out like a dead dog. Although the maid was still alive, she could only die from the pain without any antidote. With the previous example, the other maids in the Crown Prince's residence became more cautious and conscientious. In the future, no one dared to say a word. Ning Xuema's injuries were on her back, arms, and shoulders. The injuries on her arms and shoulders were easy to deal with, but the injuries on her back needed help. Furthermore, she had to take off her clothes. Ning Xuema took the medicine bottle and looked at Ji Yunhuang who was sitting beside her with a calm expression. "Your Highness, are you not going out for a walk?" Ji Yunhuang smiled. "This prince has finished all his official business, so I don't need to go out for a walk." He did it on purpose, right? Ning Xuema secretly gritted her teeth. "I'm going to apply the medicine." "And, go ahead." Ning Xuema. "Then I'll have to trouble your Highness to call a maid to apply the medicine on my back. This prince has never allowed any woman to enter this palace. At most, only the shadow guards can enter." "You want him to apply the medicine for you?" Ji Yunhuang raised his eyebrows. Ning Xuema. "Your Highness, there are always exceptions. I'm also a girl, so didn't I come in?" Since your highness has already made an exception once, why not make another one? Yes, yes. Ji Yunhuang glanced at her. If there is a first, there will be a second. If there is a second, there will be a third. Therefore, this prince has decided that in order to not make a third exception, I will not make a second exception. You will be this prince's one and only exception. One and only your head. Ning Xuemo really did not understand why this prince insisted on applying the medicine for her personally. His perverted nature was acting up. Did he want to take advantage of her? However, her current body had neither breasts nor buttocks. What was there to see? What's more, the crown prince's residence was filled with beauties. He only needed to wave his hand and there would be a large number of beauties willing to offer themselves to sleep with him. Why would he deliberately look at a young lowly who had not yet grown up? Was the crown prince a lolicon? Ning Xuemo looked at Ji Yunhuang with a trace of suspicion in her eyes. Ji Yunhuang raised his hand and wanted to knock her head again. Why are you looking at me like that? If this prince wanted to do something to you, would this prince still need to borrow you to treat your injuries and take advantage of you? That was true. Ning Xuemo blurted out, then why did you have to treat me personally? Ji Yunhuang said, first, this king's rules cannot be broken. Secondly, I don't want to see you leave a glaring scar at such a young age. The scars left behind by the soul-beating whip cannot be removed with the antidote alone. It must be accompanied by my unique healing technique. So it was like that. Ning Xuemo naturally did not want to leave a scar. Although she had her own methods to remove scars, it would be good to see the unique healing techniques of this era. Her temperament was straightforward. She immediately took off her clothes and lay down. Of course, she used her clothes to cover her front, only revealing her bare back and arms. Your Highness, please. Ji Yunhuang was speechless. She was too straightforward. This girl was really not a normal kind of straightforward. She was like a completely different person from the legends. After all, she was only a 13-year-old girl. Coupled with the fact that she was malnourished, her body had not yet developed. On her thin and weak back, there was a scarlet-red whip scar that looked like a large centipede lying there. It was extremely ugly. Ning Xuemo was lying there and did not see Ji Yunhuang's sharp eagle eyes, which stopped at her back. There was a light red birthmark there. The birthmark was in the shape of a pagoda, which looked a little strange. Chapter 50. Ji Yunhuang's finger lightly touched the birthmark on her back, and a glimmer of light flashed through his eyes. She was not an impostor. She was the real Ning Xuemo. 12 years ago, he had accidentally seen her when she was a baby. He had seen her birthmark and had even touched it out of curiosity. Other things were easy to impersonate, but not this. Moreover, other than her parents and him, there was probably no one else who knew about her birthmark. He was afraid that even this little girl herself did not know about it. He dissolved the remaining half of the pill in water and used his fingertips to smear it inch by inch on her wounds. Ning Xuemo felt as if there was an electric current flowing through his fingertips. The pain in the places that he had passed through immediately disappeared. After a slight warmth, there was a cooling sensation, followed by a slight itch. Ning Xuemo had been injured many times in her previous life, so she naturally knew what it felt like to have a wound heel. It was no different from the feeling she had now, and her recovery speed was even faster than in the modern world. It seemed like this crown prince's unique healing technique was also very brilliant. Very quickly, he finished smearing the medicine on her back. Seeing that he seemed to have the intention to stop, Ning Xuemo hurriedly moved her arm towards his direction. I'll have to trouble you to treat the wounds on my arm and shoulder as well. Ji Yunhuang's chuckle came from behind her. Didn't you not want this prince to treat your wounds? Your Highness said that if there is a first time, there will be a second time. Since your highness has already treated this commoner's back, then it doesn't matter if you treat a few more places. Good deeds must be done to the end. Ning Xuema's pain lessened, and her voice also became clearer. You really know how to climb up the pole. Ji Yunhuang's voice sounded like he was laughing yet not laughing. It sounded like he was sighing and probing. If you were this quick-witted from the start, would you have been bullied? Now, you seem like a completely different person. Could it be that he was suspicious of her identity? Your Highness should have heard of the saying, put yourself on the brink of death, right? I'm someone who has died once, so naturally, I'm more open-minded. It's reasonable for my temperament to change. It's possible for temperament to change. But you suddenly gained some skills, which is quite surprising. Perhaps the heavens saw that I had suffered too much humiliation and specially compensated me by bestowing me with so many abilities, allowing me to turn over a new leaf. Ji Yunhuang, Ning Xuema answered every question, and her answers were flawless. Even someone as astute as Ji Yunhuang could not find any loopholes in her answers. He couldn't help but sigh. He didn't ask any more questions and focused on treating the whip wounds on her arms and shoulders. Ning Xuema watched his movements attentively. She saw that there was a faint green light emitting from his fingertips as he applied the medicine to her wound. Under the green light, her wound felt cool. Could this be the art of rejuvenation that only those who cultivated the wood elemental psychokinesis could learn? Previously, he had only seen it in the game. Now, he could finally see it in real life. Psychokinesis, what a magical thing. Was there really nothing on her body? This was the first time that Ning Xuema was curious about psychokinesis since she had traveled to this world. Very quickly, Ji Yunhuang finished treating her injuries. Ji Yunhuang helped her bandage her wounds and instructed her to take note of a few things for the next few days. Only then did he get up to wash his hands. Ning Xuema looked at his slender back and her heart suddenly moved. No matter what, this crown prince treated her quite well. He was also a genius in psychokinesis, so he must have some books on cultivating psychokinesis. She thought for a moment and decided to ask him for it. Ji Yunhuang was rather surprised. Aren't you a psychokinesis trash? Even if you can't cultivate by reading these books, it's useless. Chapter 51. He turned around and looked at Ning Xuema. Seeing her pair of big eyes that were full of spirit, sparkling under the candlelight, he suddenly thought of something. Xuema, do you want to take the test again? Perhaps after this big change, God not only gave you some skills, but also changed your trash body. Ning Xuema's eyes lit up. Okay. She had been unhappy with her trash body for a long time. What if there was a problem with the machine when she was young? That's good. You should rest here today. I'll take you there tomorrow. Ning Xuema raised her head and looked outside the window. Outside the window, the sky was filled with red clouds. It was already evening. She couldn't lie down anymore, so she lifted the quilt and sat up. Why don't we go now? Ji Yunhuang sighed. You're too impatient. Your injuries haven't healed yet and you're still weak. Even if we wanted to test you, we wouldn't be able to tell. It's better for you to rest for a night and recover your energy before going. Ning Xuema's eyes looked around the room. In such a big room, there was only one bed. She probed, Your Highness, where are you going to sleep tonight? Ji Yunhuang looked at her with a smile that wasn't a smile. You want to invite me to sleep together? Invite your head. Your Highness really knows how to joke. This joke isn't funny at all. Your Highness must have many palaces. There must be beauties in those palaces who want to invite your Highness to sleep together. I'll have to trouble your Highness to help me close the door when you leave. Ning Xuema laid down on her side and closed her eyes. She had used up a lot of energy today and was tired. This prince doesn't have any beauties and only has one palace. Ji Yunhuang slowly opened his mouth. Ning Xuema opened her eyes in astonishment. This crown prince should be around 21 or 22 years old. According to the customs of this era, even if he didn't have a wife, he should have several concubines. At the very least, he should have several concubines. How could he still be single? Could it be, he was gay? She couldn't help but size him up. His appearance was handsome and elegant, but his temperament was cold and his aura was strong. Could it be that he was two-faced? What kind of attitude does this era have towards romantic love? Or was he seen as a scourge? Or should I just let it be? She tried her best to search through the memories of this body, but there was no such information at all. Ji Yunhuang was a little scared by her gaze. Little girl, why are you looking at this prince like that? Ning Xuema asked tentatively, Your Highness, what do you think about sex? What was that? Ji Yunhuang expressed that he did not understand. Ning Xuema explained, a prostitute is a delicate and pretty young man raised by the sons of officials. Seeing that Ji Yunhuang was still at a loss, she might as well explain, a prostitute is a man who can be used to warm the bed. Ji Yunhuang's face was filled with disgust. Men can warm the bed. What kind of nonsense is in that little head of yours? Don't tell me the soul-beating whip has turned you stupid. He reached out to touch her forehead. You don't have a fever. Ning Xuema was speechless. No wonder she didn't have any memories of being gay. It turns out that this continent doesn't have gay people. It seems like this crown prince doesn't like men. Oh, it seems like he's clean. In this era where stallions are everywhere, such a clean man is more precious than a giant panda. Ning Xuema looked at him with a gaze filled with respect. She cupped her hands and said, It was Xuema who misunderstood Your Highness. Your Highness, please forgive me. Chapter 52. It's fine. Ji Yunhuang casually replied. After he replied, he was a little puzzled. What did she misunderstand about him? Then Your Highness must be sleeping in the guest room tonight. Your Highness is so benevolent and righteous, Xuemo really has no way to repay you. Ning Xuemo did not give him the chance to flatter him before she shut her mouth. She stared in astonishment at the rope that flew out from Ji Yunhuang's sleeve and tied it to the two pillars. Your Highness, what is the meaning of this? Ji Yunhuang's body floated up and lay down on the rope. The rope swayed slightly and his clothes fluttered lightly. It looked as if he was lying down in the air. Tonight, this prince will sleep here. Little dragon girl. No, little dragon man, heavens, could it be that this prince is the successor of the ancient tomb sect? I heard that he is a disciple of the world's #1 sect. Could it be that the world's #1 sect is actually a branch of the ancient tomb sect? Your Highness, does your Sun Moon Divine sect sleep like this? Ji Yunhuang turned slightly on the rope. Little girl, you are talking nonsense. What Sun Moon Divine sect? It's the Sun Moon Divine sect. Ning Xuema rubbed her nose. Fine, she automatically remembered the Sun Moon Divine sect as Dongfang Bubai's Sun Moon Divine sect. However, with such a divine way and such a flashy style, it should be similar to the Sun Moon Divine sect, right? Only, she did not know if their sect leader, the ancestor, was also as ecstatic as Dongfang Bubai. At this moment, Ning Xuema's thoughts had already drifted 8,000 li away. She only heard Ji Yunhuang continue. This kind of resting method is only used by the Sun Moon Divine sect's direct descendants. Furthermore, the deeper one's cultivation, the thinner the rope they sleep on. Just like my master, the rope he sleeps on is only as thick as a pinky finger. Ning Xuema looked at the rope under Ji Yunhuang's body, which was as thick as half a fist. She once again blurted out, "Your master is the ancestor's disciple, right? If he sleeps on a rope as thick as a pinky finger, then doesn't that mean your master, the ancestor, sleeps on a rope as thick as a thread?" Black lines appeared on Ji Yunhuang's face. He chuckled softly. No one has ever seen the ancestor's appearance when he is resting. Ning Xuema was curious. Really? Could it be that his disciples and maids who served him have never seen him before? Ji Yunhuang lowered his eyes. No one has seen it. In fact, where the ancestor sleeps at night has always been an unsolved mystery. Ning Xuema. Mysterious indeed. Could this be the legendary saying of a crafty rabbit having 3 burrows? This venerable emperor seems to be quite paranoid. He doesn't trust anyone, or maybe he was just trying to show off. Your Highness, doesn't your ancestor have white hair and a youthful complexion? He has the demeanor of a transcendent being. It was a pity that she didn't even get to see a corner of his robe. She felt a little regretful that she had missed the chance to meet the most eye-catching person in the world. Therefore, it was not a bad idea to ask someone who knew the situation. Ji Yunhuang sighed. "Xuema, has no one ever told you that you can't casually discuss the ancestors' matters?" Ning Xuema rubbed her nose again. There seemed to be such a thing. She smiled. "There are only the 2 of us here. It shouldn't be a problem to talk about it a little, right? Besides, you are his direct disciple, so you should have seen him a few times. Why don't you tell me a little about him?" Her pair of big eyes twinkled. Her appearance was very lovable. Ji Yunhuang's heart skipped a beat. He finally said a few words. "I have been in the Sun Moon sect for so long, but I have only seen the ancestor twice. The ancestor wears a mask all year round, so no one knows what he looks like. However, his hair is quite black, like a curtain. There is indeed no one who has the demeanor of a transcendent being like him. He is not someone ordinary people can compare to." Chapter 53. At this point, he stopped talking and did not want to talk about the ancestor anymore. It was obvious that he worshipped this master from the bottom of his heart. Ning Xuema smiled and did not say anything, but her heart did not agree. This ancestor should not be young anymore. He must be a wily old fox in Jianghu, so he should know what to do in order to be mysterious. It seemed that his technique was not that strong, otherwise he would not have failed to maintain his appearance and only managed to keep his hair black. The face under that mask must have been filled with wrinkles, so wrinkled that even flies could be caught in them. "Ha ha ha. Xuema, what are you thinking?" Ji Yunhuang asked. He felt that her expression was a little strange. Nothing. Ning Xuema naturally would not tell him her inner thoughts. She turned over and got off the bed. "Xuema's injuries are almost healed, so I should go home and rest. I won't disturb His Highness the Crown Prince any longer. Goodbye, goodbye." She cupped her hands towards Ji Yunhuang and turned to leave. If she really slept in the same room as the Crown Prince tonight, even if nothing happened, she would not be able to clear her name. According to the rules of this era, she could only marry the Crown Prince as his wife or concubine. Although she did not care much about the rules of this era, she still did not want to add unnecessary trouble. As she walked, the whip wounds on her body began to hurt again. The wounds that had just healed felt like they were going to split open again. Her forehead was covered in sweat. Ji Yunhuang naturally knew what she was worried about. His eyes darkened slightly. This little girl did not seem to care about being his woman at all. Did she know what she was giving up by leaving? He turned over and got off the bed. He raised his hand and a faint white light was emitted. Ning Xuema's body became numb and she lay back down on the bed. "You can't move right now. You must rest for the night. Tonight, I will sleep outside and will not affect your reputation." Tomorrow morning, I will come and call you. With a wave of his sleeve, he put away the rope and walked out. A moment later, the voices of two maids came from outside the bedroom. His Highness ordered us to serve Miss Ning. If Miss Ning needs anything, please tell us. Ning Xuema's acupoints were sealed, so she couldn't move for a while. Fortunately, she could still speak. She asked casually, "Where is His Highness the Crown Prince?" "His Highness has left the residence and will be back tomorrow morning. His Highness would rather sleep outside than in his own guest room." He was truly a freak. What Ning Xuema didn't know was that the Crown Prince had a huge obsession with choosing his room. He always slept in a fixed place, otherwise, he wouldn't be able to fall asleep. Fifth Prince Mansion. The fifth prince, Ji Yunxiao, was a very regular prince. Every day, he would go to bed to rest, but tonight, he couldn't sleep. This was because his third brother, the Crown Prince Ji Yunhuang, had suddenly paid him a visit and insisted on playing a few games of chess with him. Among all the princes, only Ji Yunxiao's chess skills were comparable to the Crown Prince's. Thus, the two brothers had a lot of fun playing chess in the octagonal pavilion. Although Ji Yunxiao was an idle prince, he still had a lot of eyes and ears, so he was able to get information quickly. Tonight, Ji Yunhuang seemed to be a little absent-minded. Occasionally, he would make a wrong move, which was very different from his usual style of chess. Ji Yunxiao teased him, "Third brother, this little brother heard a new interesting news today. I heard that you gave old Sixth a show of strength at the tea house and even brought his little wife to your house. Is that true?" Chapter 54. Ji Yunhuang's expression did not change as he indifferently said, "What old Sixth's wife? She and old Sixth broke off their engagement long ago. She is now only the daughter of Marquis Jingyuan." With a pah sound, the chess piece in Ji Yunxiao's hand fell onto the chessboard. "Are you serious? Third brother, are you really interested in that little girl? She is a good-for-nothing, even old Sixth dislikes her." Good-for-nothing. Maybe she just doesn't have psychokinesis aptitude. Ji Yunhuang placed down a chess piece. TSK, speaking up for her like this, it seems like your stone heart is finally starting to waver. However, third brother, this little brother sincerely advises you. That girl was once engaged to old Sixth. Even if she has already broken off the engagement, it won't be good for you to take her. There are so many beautiful women in this world who want to throw themselves at you, so why do you have to be entangled with her? Don't even talk about marrying her as an imperial concubine. Even if you want to take her as a concubine, imperial father will definitely not agree. With a pah sound, the chess piece in Ji Yunhuang's hand almost shattered the chessboard. Old Fifth, when did I say that I want to take a wife as a concubine? You're thinking too much. Come, it's rare for us brothers to get together. If I don't accompany you to kill all night, then I'm sorry that you called me third brother. The speed at which he placed his chess piece was much faster. Ji Yunxiao's lips twitched. Who is accompanying who? He had never stayed up this late before. He was so tired. Ning Xuema was awakened by a loud noise. She opened her eyes and saw the faint light of a fire outside the window. There was also the sound of hurried footsteps. "Lord Lu, no one is allowed to enter the Crown Prince's palace. Now that the Crown Prince is not here, without his permission, your people are not allowed to enter." Ning Xuema could tell that the person speaking was the Crown Prince's housekeeper. "I am handling this case by imperial decree. Since the criminal is hiding in the Crown Prince's palace, how can I catch her if I don't go in?" Lord Lu's voice was very dignified. "There's no other way. No matter what, you can't barge into the Crown Prince's palace. Otherwise, if the Crown Prince blames you, we won't be able to bear the consequences." Lord Lu, why don't you wait until the Crown Prince returns? The housekeeper did not give way. There's a criminal in the Crown Prince's palace. Could it be that the person that Lord Lu wanted to capture her? Why? She didn't seem to have broken any laws, right? However, she also knew that once she was implicated in the royal family's affairs, who knew how many plots and schemes would be plotted against her. Since they came to arrest her with such great fanfare, they must have something on her. She was just an orphan girl with no one to rely on. If there were any officials or nobles who wanted to kill her, they would make her take the blame. She couldn't just sit and wait for death. Once she was captured and sent to the prison of the Ministry of Justice, her life would be over. Ning Xuema subconsciously wanted to jump up from the bed, but as soon as she moved, she felt numb all over. Her hands and feet didn't feel like they were her own, so she couldn't move at all. Damn it! Before Ji Yunhuang left, he had sealed her acupoints so that she could rest and recuperate. She could not move at all. She pricked up her ears and listened for a moment. Lord Lu and the Crown Prince's head steward were still arguing outside, but they didn't send troops to barge in. It seemed that Lord Lu was still very wary of the Crown Prince. She heaved a sigh of relief. If things continued like this, she would have to wait for Ji Yunhuang to return before she could make a decision. Then, she would still have a chance to escape. She didn't know where Ji Yunhuang had gone. If he was present, even if Lord Lu was under the orders of the Emperor, he wouldn't let anyone take her away so easily. Chapter 55. She closed her eyes and used the little bit of internal energy that she had just cultivated to attack the sealed acupoints. It was better to rely on herself than on others. She had to save herself. She had to recover her mobility first. After all, her body was too weak and the internal energy in her body was limited. Furthermore, Ji Yunhuang's acupoint sealing technique was very special, so she couldn't undo it in a short time. Just as she was concentrating, she suddenly heard a pleasant female voice from outside. "What's all this commotion about in my brother's place?" Lord Lu said, "Reporting to Your Highness, Marshal whose daughter suddenly died after returning home today. Marquis Jingyuan's daughter, Ning Xuema, is a major suspect." This lowly official was ordered by the Emperor to arrest her, but the housekeeper did not allow me to enter. Although they were separated by half a courtyard, Ning Xuema could still hear Lord Lu's words clearly. Her mind was blown. Hu Daichang died. How could that be? At that time, she had only used a special acupoint sealing technique to affect her fetus. At most, she would be unable to conceive in the future. How could she suddenly die? Outside the courtyard, the housekeeper repeated the same words as before. The princess laughed coldly and said, "Other people can't enter Brother Crown Prince's bedroom, but I can. The Emperor's orders cannot be disobeyed. I will help you this time." As soon as she finished speaking, the door to the palace was suddenly pushed open. Ning Xuema's vision blurred, and a young girl dressed in luxurious clothes was standing in front of the bed. She looked to be about 17 or 18 years old. Her red phoenix eyes were slanted, and her cherry blossom lips were lightly pursed. Her black hair was tied up high with a peony white jade hairpin inserted into the bun. She wore a moon-white mermaid dress, which made her look like a fairy. She looked down at Ning Xuema and sized her up. A dark light flashed in her eyes. "You are Ning Xuema. You are so young yet so seductive. I don't know what kind of underhanded method you used to make my brother keep you in his palace. You are ruining his reputation." This princess had a strong enmity towards her. She looked at her as if she was looking at her rival in love. Ning Xuema narrowed her eyes slightly, and the information about this princess quickly flashed through her mind. This princess's name was Ji Yunyao. She didn't grow up in the palace. It was said that when the old emperor was out on an inspection tour, he happened to meet a commoner woman and she got pregnant. After the old emperor returned to the palace, that woman was pregnant for 10 months and gave birth to this princess. It wasn't until this princess was 15 years old that the woman told her the truth before she died. Thus, she came to the capital alone to acknowledge her relatives. This kind of drama was a bit like Siwei in Princess Pearl, but she did not go through so much trouble like Siwei. Her process of being recognized was very smooth. Not long after she arrived in the capital, she became a noble princess. The old emperor had many princes, but she was the only princess. Naturally, he doted on her a lot. The princess also got along well with her brothers. Of course, the one she got along with the most was the crown prince. It was said that Ji Yunhuang doted on her a lot. Every time he returned to the capital, this princess would follow him like a shadow, and the doors of the crown prince's residence would always be open for her. It seemed like the rumors were true. Ji Yunyao could enter and leave the crown prince's palace as she pleased. Ji Yunyao's hostility towards her was too strong, and Ning Xuemo could naturally sense it. She lowered her eyes slightly, and the corners of her lips slightly hooked up. It seemed like this princess's feelings towards her brother, the crown prince, were not pure, incestuous love. Hee hee. What are you laughing at, you lowly servant? You are about to die, and you are still laughing. Ji Yunyao was angry. Chapter 56. Ning Xuemo lifted her eyes. Princess misunderstands. His Highness the Crown Prince and I are pure and innocent. We are just ordinary friends. He kept me here only because he took a fancy to my medical skills and cherished my talent. That's why he treated me. Because I can't move after the treatment, he let me stay here. His Highness also left the residence to avoid arousing suspicion. You called me a vixen and said that I used underhanded methods. Not only did you insult me, but you also insulted your brother Crown Prince. Is he such a shallow person? A woman who was blinded by jealousy could not be reasoned with. Now that Ning Xuemo had fallen into her hands, she could not resist. She did not want to be burned to death by her jealousy for no reason. The first thing she did was to draw a clear line between her and Ji Yunhuang and remove a portion of the princess's hostility. That way, she would suffer less. Sure enough, after she said those words, the hostility in Ji Yunyao's eyes lessened a bit. However, she still had some doubts. Medical skills. What kind of medical skills could a good-for-nothing like you have? Ning Xuemo continued to smile and calmly explained, this humble girl does not dare to lie in front of Princess. A few days ago, I cured a woman with a broken arm. If Princess does not believe me, you can personally go to the Supreme Court to ask. That woman is still being treated in the Supreme Court. The suspicion in Ji Yunyao's eyes deepened, but you're talking nonsense. How come this princess has never heard of this matter? Ning Xuemo suddenly understood. On this continent, there weren't many divine doctors. Every divine doctor was highly sought after by various countries. In order to not let the other countries know about it, she was afraid that Ji Yunhuang had quietly suppressed the news of her reconnecting her second aunt's arm. No wonder she had not heard anyone talk about this when she was strolling on the streets these past few days. It turned out that this matter had not spread outside. If Princess does not believe me, you can go and ask His Highness the Crown Prince when you have time. He will know that Xuemo is not lying. Ji Yunyao's red phoenix eyes jumped. Although she still did not believe her, the hostility in her eyes lessened a lot. This princess will ask clearly about this matter. However, you are suspected of murdering Miss Hu. You have to go to the Ministry of Justice to give an explanation. She lifted her hand to unseal Ning Xuemo's acupoints and said, "Get up and follow me." Ning Xuemo moved her slightly numb joints. The whip wounds on her body were still burning with pain. Because of the whip wounds, her body was far less agile than usual. And this princess was obviously a psychokinesis expert. If he wanted to escape from under her nose, there was not even half a chance. Instead, he would suffer more. Of course, Ning Xuemo wouldn't do such a stupid thing. All she wanted to do was to delay. She had to stall for time until the crown prince came back. If she had known earlier, she would have let the crown prince rest in the same room as her. She slowly got up, put on her shoes, and straightened her clothes. Ji Yunyao was impatient. "Why are you moving so slowly? Hurry up." Ning Xuemo cursed her ancestors in her heart, but the expression on her face was very obedient. "Yes, Your Highness. This commoner was injured and my body is in pain. My movements are a bit slow. Please forgive me, Your Highness." Ji Yunyao knew that she had been whipped and knew the power of the soul-breaking whip. She humphed and did not rush her anymore. Ning Xuemo's movements were already very slow. It took her a full quarter of an hour to tidy herself up. While tidying herself up, she glanced outside the window. In her heart, she miserably cursed, "Mother. Where did that bastard Ji Yunhuang go? Why isn't he back yet?" Chapter 57. At this moment, Ji Yunhuang was in a place that Ning Xuemo would never have expected, the Imperial Palace. He originally planned to play chess with Ji Yunxiao for the night, but unexpectedly, he received an imperial edict from the palace in the middle of the night. His imperial father urgently summoned him to the palace. The imperial edict could not be disobeyed, so he could only bid farewell to the fifth prince and directly enter the palace. What he didn't know was that not even 15 minutes after he left, the guards from the crown prince's residence hurriedly came to the fifth prince's residence. They wanted to report to him that the Ministry of Justice had come to arrest him, but they didn't find him. Ji Yunhuang only found out when he entered the palace that his imperial father had caught a cold and was lying on the dragon bed. He specifically asked him to accompany him. Ji Yunhuang was helpless. He also had nowhere to go tonight, so he stayed behind. He felt that his imperial father was a little long-winded tonight. He asked him about his recent situation and chatted with him. He could only reply perfunctorily. He did not know why he felt a little anxious. He wanted to go back to the residence to take a look, but his imperial father was particularly clingy tonight and did not allow him to leave. Ning Xuemo had delayed long enough, but Ji Yunhuang had not returned. In the end, she was brought out by Ji Yunyao and handed over to Lord Lu from the Ministry of Justice. Ning Xuemo naturally asked for the reason for her arrest, but Lord Lu simply said, "You will naturally know when you arrive at the Ministry of Justice. If you are wronged, you will naturally be released." He ordered people to handcuff Ning Xuemo with iron chains. Ning Xuemo knew that with her current ability, she would not be able to escape, so she did not make any unnecessary struggles to avoid suffering. She gritted her teeth and followed them. What Ning Xuemo did not expect was that she would not be brought to the Ministry of Justice's main hall after being arrested. Instead, she was directly sent to the Ministry of Justice's prison. The long and narrow passageway, the thick and dark stone walls, the dim and swaying oil lamp, the damp and fishy smell, and from time to time, the screams and groans from the depths of the prison, everything was no different from the ancient prison that Ning Xuemo had guessed. In fact, it was even more frightening. That Lord Lu sent people to escort her into the prison. When she was handed over to a thin and withered man, Ning Xuemo knew that the situation was far from good. That man had a short stature and appeared to be about the same height as Ning Xuemo. He was short, fat, and thin, but his face was so wrinkled that it could squeeze a fly to death. The corners of his eyes drooped, and his pair of triangular eyes emitted a razor-sharp light. He was wearing a dark red robe that was speckled with brown stains that looked like blood stains. He seemed to be disabled in both legs and was pushed out in a wheelchair by the prison guards. Despite its ugly appearance, it exuded a dark and bloody aura that made people shudder. There were 6 bailiffs from the Ministry of Justice who escorted Ning Xuemo in. One of the leaders exchanged greetings with the man. From their greetings, Ning Xuemo learned that the man was called Tui Dao, a very fierce and murderous name. She did not know what the leader of the bailiff said to Tui Dao, but Tui Dao nodded his head slightly and sized up Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo felt an indescribable chill run down her spine. She faintly felt as if a blade had brushed past her. It was as if she was being stared at by a ferocious beast, not good. Could it be that they were going to punish her without distinguishing between right and wrong? Were they going to give her a beating first? Ning Xuemo slowly clenched her fists, and the iron chains on her wrists made a clanking sound. The 6 bailiffs from the Ministry of Justice turned around and left. Tui Dao glanced at Ning Xuemo again. A bloodthirsty light flashed in his eyes, and he ordered his men to escort Ning Xuemo inside. Chapter 58. Where are you taking me? Ning Xuemo didn't move. Tui Dao smiled, revealing his white teeth. Of course it's where you should go. You killed Marshal Hu's daughter. Do you still want to live in a luxurious room? I didn't kill her. Her death has nothing to do with me. Little girl, you won't be saying that soon. Take her to the torture chamber. Tui Dao's face darkened as he sternly ordered. Ning Xuemo's heart sank. These people didn't even interrogate her before torturing her. They obviously wanted to torture her into confessing and send her to eternal damnation. Who was the one behind her back that wanted to harm her? She still had whip wounds on her body, and her strength hadn't recovered yet. She couldn't move nimbly, and her hands and feet were still shackled. She was surrounded by 16 tall and strong prison guards. Looking at their bright eyes, Ning Xuemo knew that their cultivations weren't low. With her current strength, it would be a fool's dream to force her way in. She steeled her heart and followed them inside. There was a bluestone path under her feet. It was bumpy and uneven, and there were dark red bloodstains in those potholes. Under the light of the oil lamps, they could be seen clearly. The deeper they went in, the heavier the smell of blood became, and the worse the smell became. There were prisoners in cage-like cells on both sides. Some of them were lying on the grass, some were holding on to the iron door, and some were lying on the dirty stone slabs. Although their postures were different, they all had one thing in common, and that was that they had all gone through the cruelest punishment. Their hair was disheveled, their clothes were torn, and their flesh was missing piece by piece. Even their bones seemed to have been deformed, and their bodies were grotesquely shaped. Every one of them was trembling, and they were all growling. Although their voices were indistinct, their movements were quite loud, like the low cries of death, and hearing it gave people goosebumps. Little girl, do you see this? These people are all stubborn and refuse to confess. They're suffering for nothing. Tui Dao's voice was naturally hoarse, and his words were like the hissing of a poisonous snake. It sounded eerily in the dark corridor. Ning Xuemo lowered her eyes and didn't say anything. She had seen the world in her previous life. During her special agent training, she had been subjected to torture when she was unfortunately arrested. She had been forced to drink chilly water, sit on a tiger stool, and even sit on an electric chair. She had also captured enemy agents and interrogated them personally, torturing them. However, that was a modern society after all, with international public opinion and pervasive media monitoring. Even if they were to use torture, they would not use the extremely cruel ancient punishments. But now, everything she saw was as if she was in the 18th level of hell. Even the 10 great tortures of the Qing dynasty were not as tragic as what she saw. Those people did not even look human anymore. She definitely wouldn't be able to endure such a punishment with her delicate skin and tender flesh. Even if she were to take a step back, even if she had a body full of stubbornness, if she turned into a ghost like those people, then what was the point of her living? What to do? What should she do? Waiting for someone to save him. She knew too few people in this world. The only one who was truly good to her was the Crown Prince, but he was nowhere to be found. He might not be able to make it tonight. Even if she could rush over, she probably wouldn't be able to make it. Moreover, from the looks of it now, this was clearly a trap. A trap that wanted to completely destroy her. The person who set this trap had most likely blocked off all the possibilities of her being saved. Otherwise, Ji Yunhuang would have rushed over long ago. She didn't believe that the Crown Prince's information would be blocked to this extent. He must have been hindered. Chapter 59. There shouldn't be anyone coming to save her tonight. She had to save herself. But in this heavily guarded prison, how was she going to save herself and escape this misfortune? Tui Dao's snake-like gaze fell on her, and a trace of astonishment flashed through his triangular eyes. Many indomitable and unyielding men came here and saw the miserable state of the others in the prison. Many of them were so frightened that they peed their pants. Even if they were brave enough to walk, their faces were pale and their heads were covered in cold sweat. Ning Xuema only slightly pursed her lips and lowered her head. No other expression could be seen on her small face. His appearance was ugly, his height was similar to a dwarf's, and his voice was unpleasant to the ears. Coupled with his lame legs, Tui Dao usually couldn't raise his head in front of others. However, his personality was extremely arrogant. The huge contrast in his life made his personality turn gloomy and perverted. Although his appearance wasn't very good to the public, he had a pair of unparalleled skillful hands and super perverted torture methods. In addition, he was good at observing people's expressions and flattering people. Therefore, his official position rose very quickly. From a small prison guard, he became the head of the prison. Along the way, he had stepped on countless skeletons and lives, his personality was cold and his methods were cruel. Regardless of whether the prisoners who fell into his hands were innocent or not, they would all confess. He was full of tricks. His cruel and vicious torture methods made everyone's expression change when they talked about him. In the Ministry of Justice's prison, he had a nickname. King of Hell. Tuesday. Years of bloody life made his personality slide further and further down the path of perverted behavior. He had a strange hobby. He liked to see prisoners pee their pants and listen to the prisoners' miserable screams. In his ears, the prisoners' miserable screams were the most beautiful music. The more miserable the screams were, the more beautiful it was. Moreover, he liked to torture young and beautiful women the most. Seeing them moan and cry under his torture gave him a perverted sense of accomplishment. As for Ning Xuema, if she fell into the clutches of such a pervert tonight, how could she survive? Ah! A mournful cry came from a room at the end of the road. It was a woman's voice. It was as sharp as the cry of a malicious spirit. Ning Xuema's body trembled. She raised her head and looked over. Her pupils suddenly shrank. That room was the torture chamber. She finally saw the real torture scene, and that scene made Ning Xuema, who was used to seeing storms, feel her palms turn cold. There were all kinds of strange torture tools in the room. Dirty blood flowed on the floor, and the stench of blood assailed their nostrils, making them want to vomit. There was a person nailed to the stone wall in the middle of the room. That should be a young girl. Her body was naked and covered in bloodstains. Her breasts were already gone, having been cut off while she was still alive. There was a red-hot iron rod stuck in her most delicate part of her body, which was currently emitting white smoke. The air was filled with the smell of barbecued flesh. The reason why Ning Xuema could tell that she was a young girl was because her face was intact and her fingers were as slender as jade. That girl was very beautiful. Her pretty face was flawless. She had such a perfect face, but her body had been tortured until it was in tatters. Her flesh was badly mutilated, and her bones were exposed in many places. Such a contrast gave people a strong impact. Ning Xuema's whole body turned cold. Tu Yidao's eyes had been staring at Ning Xuema like a poisonous snake. Seeing that her expression finally changed, he was unusually happy and laughed. "Little girl, you probably don't recognize her. She's a famous woman in our Chongkong country." Chapter 60. Tu Yidao's eyes had been staring at Ning Xuema like a poisonous snake. Seeing that her expression had finally changed, he was exceptionally happy and chuckled. "Little girl, you probably don't recognize her. She's a famous girl in our Chongkong Empire. She was a psychokinesis genius since she was young and was chosen by the second largest sect, the Heavenly Star sect. She became the inner disciple of one of the three protectors there and was once the pride of our Chongkong Empire. Her mistake was that she didn't learn well and actually went to the imperial palace to steal the princess things. She was caught red-handed by the princess and sent here. She's very stubborn and didn't confess. That's why she suffered so much." TSK, why did she have to suffer so much? Tu Yidao shook his head and sighed. "I didn't steal. Ji Yunyao framed me." That girl was in so much pain, but her mind was still very clear and she tried to defend herself with a hoarse voice. TSK, it seems like you didn't suffer enough. You need this official to personally serve you." Tu Yidao sneered and slowly pushed his wheelchair over. "You pervert, just kill me." That girl screamed. "Little beauty, you haven't confessed yet. How can this official bear to kill you? I can only properly serve you." Tu Yidao took out a small knife that was as thin as a cicada's wing and stroked that girl's delicate cheeks with his slender and cold fingers. He sighed softly. What a beautiful and delicate face. If it was peeled off and made into a human skin mask, it would definitely be very exquisite. "Don't worry, this official won't destroy your face. I'll take it off completely." That girl's body trembled and she gritted her teeth. Her personality was indeed strong. Other than her arms, the rest of her bones were broken inch by inch. If she wasn't nailed to the ground, she would have collapsed like mud. This girl was already completely crippled. Even if she survived, she would be a cripple who couldn't take care of herself. This Tu Yidao didn't want the truth. He only wanted the result he wanted. Therefore, it was useless to cry out to him. Ning Xuema's palms were covered in cold sweat. Was she going to die here tonight? She looked on helplessly as Tu Yidao used that thin knife to peel off that girl's face bit by bit. The woman's screams were almost ear-piercing. No matter how brave Ning Xuema was, he was drenched in cold sweat. The woman fainted several times and was woken up several times by splashes of ice water. She could neither live nor die. When the woman was once again awakened by a splash of cold water, she finally broke down completely. "I confess. I confess. I only beg for death." Tu Yidao smiled. His smile was very complacent and compassionate. "Pitiful child. If you had done this earlier, you wouldn't have had to suffer so much." The other jailers had already brought forward the written confession for the woman to sign. Ning Xuema finally understood why this perverted demon didn't break the prisoner's hand. It was all for this moment. That woman was untied from the wall and laid there like a pile of mud. Fresh blood formed a puddle beneath her body. Tu Yidao waited for her to finish signing before looking at it with satisfaction. He flipped the paper and folded it with satisfaction. Then, he casually stabbed the woman's heart. The woman's body trembled. She let out her last breath as if she had been freed and finally stopped moving. "Take her away and throw her to the wild dogs in the mass grave." Tu Yidao turned his wheelchair around in disdain. The woman, who no longer looked human, was dragged out. Only Ning Xuemo, Tui Dao, and a few jailers were left in the torture room. Chapter 61. Tui Dao shook the skin that he had just peeled off and handed it to Ning Xuemo. "Little miss, do you think this official's skills are good enough?" Ning Xuemo subconsciously took 2 steps back and looked at the skin. She had to admit that Tui Dao's skills were really good. The skin was as thin as a cicada's wing and was even in thickness. It didn't have the slightest bit of damage or knife marks. It looked very neat. "Little miss, are you scared? If you're scared, then obediently confess. To tell you the truth, this official quite likes your tender skin. If I peel it off, it will definitely be very beautiful." Tui Dao's cold hands almost touched Ning Xuemo's cheeks as he laughed strangely. "This official will count to 3. If you don't confess, you will also be put on the torture rack." The prison guards here had been influenced by Tui Dao for a long time, so almost all of them were perverted. At this moment, 4 pairs of eyes were staring at her like tigers and wolves. They were rubbing their palms together, waiting for her to say no before they put her on the torture rack. "Every night, my waist hurts. My lumbosacral region is as stiff as a rock. Intermittently, or alternately, I feel pain on both sides of my waist and buttocks. It radiates to my thighs. My waist muscles convulse." Ning Xuemo suddenly opened her mouth and uttered a string of professional terms. The other prison guards didn't understand what she was saying, but Tui Dao's body suddenly stiffened. His triangular eyes shot out a sharp light. "Little miss, what did you say?" Ning Xuemo's eyes were as clear as a lake, shining brightly. She slowly said, "First, your legs will hurt, then your joints will hurt and slowly become swollen and deformed. After 3 years, you will lose all feeling and become as stiff as wood or stone." Tui Dao's eyes widened, and he looked at Ning Xuemo as if he was looking at a monster. The symptoms that Ning Xuemo described were exactly the same as his. In the entire Chong Kong Empire, no one could see through his illness, let alone treat it. They could only let it develop. This illness had been tormenting him for 6 years, but he didn't expect that it would be exposed by a little miss today. His originally desperate heart suddenly jumped. "You know about this illness?" Ning Xuemo smiled and nodded. "Not only do I know, but I also know how to treat them." Tui Dao, who had always been as calm as a rock, trembled slightly. "How do you treat him?" "If you let me go, I'll treat you," Ning Xuemo said straightforwardly. A dark light flashed through Tui Dao's triangular eyes. "Little girl, you're exaggerating. I don't know how many famous doctors I've invited to treat my illness, but none of them could cure me. Do you really have one?" "I don't believe it. This humble girl can try treating Milord on the spot. If there is no effect, this humble girl will be at your disposal." Tui Dao muttered to himself for a while and finally couldn't resist the temptation and nodded. "Okay. I'll give you a chance." Ning Xuemo looked at the iron chain on her wrist. "Sir, please have someone prepare 20 silver needles." She said a series of things and finally made a request. "Treating your illness is a delicate job. I'm afraid it's not possible to have this iron chain on my wrist." The things she wanted were all available in the Ministry of Justice's prison. Tui Dao quickly sent someone to fetch them. The iron chain on Ning Xuemo's wrist was also unlocked. Her legs were still shackled, and she was also a good-for-nothing without psychokinesis. Tui Dao naturally wasn't afraid that she would play any tricks. Ning Xuemo smiled slightly and began to treat Tui Dao with acupuncture under the watchful eyes of the prison guards. Her movements were swift and nimble. The acupuncture technique she used was a lost acupuncture technique she had learned in the modern era. This technique could take effect in a very short time, after the acupuncture was done, she stood up. It can take effect within an hour. Milord, you can stand for a while. Tui Dao's face was full of disbelief. He didn't know how many medicines he had taken and how many needles he had received over the past few years, but they all seemed to have no effect at all. Chapter 62. How could this little girl make him stand up with just a dozen needles on his legs and waist? Ning Xuema ignored him and sat down on one of the torture instruments after the needles were inserted. She closed her eyes and rested. She had to make full use of every second to heal herself. Unknowingly, an hour had passed. Tui Dao's stiff waist seemed to have a warm current flowing rapidly, spreading to his legs. Wherever it passed, the stiff and numb feeling gradually disappeared. Then, under the watchful eyes of the jailers, his legs suddenly moved. It moved, it moved. "Sir, your legs moved," someone cried out in surprise. Although Tui Dao's face was still gloomy, his hands couldn't help but tremble. He could feel his legs. He really could feel them. He tried his best to control his excitement and slowly tried to stand up from the wheelchair. He staggered a few steps like a child learning how to walk. Although his legs were numb and painful, his heart was blooming with joy. He could walk. After being crippled for 3 years, he finally tasted the feeling of walking with his own legs again. The surrounding jailers congratulated him incessantly. Tui Dao slowly walked a dozen steps before sitting back down in his wheelchair. His face darkened. "Little girl, although I can walk a few steps, my legs are numb and painful. It's even more painful than before. It didn't work at all. Come, punish her." When Ning Xuema was inserting needles for him, he secretly memorized the steps. In the future, he could treat himself by himself and didn't need to rely on this little girl anymore. Ning Xuema's case was directly suppressed by the higher-ups. Even if he had 8 times the courage, he wouldn't dare to let her go without permission. He couldn't even let her live past tonight. Although the jailers didn't understand what Tui Dao was thinking, they had always followed his lead. They immediately agreed and strode forward to arrest Ning Xuema. "Sir, this humble girl only said that the needles worked this time. I just wanted to let you see the results first. If you want to completely cure your illness, you need another treatment plan," Ning Xuema said. Tui Dao was stunned for a moment. He waved his hand and dismissed the jailers who were about to take action. "What's your other treatment plan?" Ning Xuema smiled and said nothing. Tui Dao paused for a moment and coldly said, "This official knew that you would raise conditions. What are your conditions? Don't even think that I'll let you go. I don't have that right." Ning Xuema sighed softly. "I also know that it's impossible for you to let me go. Xuema only has one request, and that is to let go of Xuema for 1 night without torture. Can you agree to that?" Tui Dao's eyes flickered. He thought for a moment and didn't answer Ning Xuema's question directly. Instead, he asked, "How long will your other treatment plan take?" "At least 6 hours." Ning Xuema answered every question. Tui Dao looked at the hourglass beside him. There were still 8 hours until daybreak. The higher-ups would only ask him for the results after daybreak, and 2 hours was enough for him to properly concoct a girl. He smiled as kindly and sincerely as he could. "All right, this official promises you." Ning Xuema's eyes flickered, and her face was filled with hope. "Thank you, sir. Xuema will definitely treat you properly and let you be completely cured. You won't have to suffer from this illness anymore." Tui Dao nodded and smiled amiably. "That's good. This official still likes a little girl like you. It's fine to let you go for 1 night. Who knows, someone might come to save you tomorrow morning. That way, you'll be saved. Xuema thinks so. No matter what, I have to thank Sir for giving Shuama this opportunity. Ning Shuama's smile bloomed like a flower. Chapter 63. While comforting her, Tui Dao sneered in his heart. She was a little girl after all. She was too naive. She was easy to trick and coax. His superiors had clearly stated that he could use any means on this girl as long as she confessed tonight. After she confessed, he would execute her and make it look like she committed suicide after confessing. Everything had already been arranged. This little girl actually wanted to use her medical skills to exchange for a chance to live. She was really naive. This little girl was still talented. What a pity. He had already calculated that Ning Shuama would treat him for 6 hours. As for the remaining 2 hours, it would be enough for him to properly deal with her and make her obediently admit her guilt. Not only would he be able to cure his chronic illness, he would also be able to complete the mission assigned to him by the higher-ups. He was afraid that Ning Shuama wouldn't do her best to treat him, so he spoke to her very kindly and agreed to all her requests. For example, he unlocked all the shackles on her body, found all the necessary surgical tools, and sent all the prison guards out to wait outside the door. Ning Shuama said that she needed absolute silence during these 6 hours and couldn't be disturbed by anyone. Tui Dao's psychokinesis wasn't low. Even if he couldn't walk, with his martial arts, he could withstand the attacks of 20 to 30 strong men. Naturally, he didn't care about this thin and weak girl. Even if they were alone in a room, he wasn't afraid that she would play tricks. If she dared to play tricks, he could crush all the bones in her body in an instant. Everyone also felt that a little girl like Ning Shuama wouldn't be able to play any tricks. After preparing everything, they all left. Tui Dao secretly sized up Ning Shuama's small face. Her small face was filled with joy, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Clearly, she had already believed his promise and was wholeheartedly waiting for someone to rescue her tomorrow. Since she was like this, she naturally wouldn't play any tricks. Tui Dao was even more relieved. After Ning Shuama arranged the needles, she squatted in front of Tui Dao and started to insert the needles. Every single needle was used right under Tui Dao's nose, and the acupoints that were pierced were not the most fatal ones. In the beginning, Tui Dao was still on guard, but after a while, he relaxed. He looked at the little head that was busy working in front of him with her head lowered. He looked at her little face that was flushed red from using the needles too often, and evil thoughts began to form in his heart. Although this girl was thin and weak, she had a pretty face. When she smiled, she was especially sweet and pleasant. If such a girl was directly executed, it would be a waste of God's gift. Perhaps he would use her as an appetizer and let her have a taste of men before. When he thought of this, a sinister smile appeared on his face. It has to be said that this girl's method of inserting needles was very strange but also very effective. After inserting 30 needles into his body began to feel numb and hot. Waves of heat flowed through his body, giving him an indescribable comfortable feeling. And he humphed and opened his mouth to praise her, but unexpectedly, when he opened his mouth, not a single word came out. His throat seemed to have malfunctioned. His nerves could not reach there. What was going on? Tui Dao subconsciously wanted to straighten his body, but his brain had already ordered his limbs to move. His limbs didn't have the slightest intention of moving. It felt like he had fallen into a nightmare. His heart understood everything and could see everything, but he couldn't shout or move. Chapter 64. He felt like he had fallen into a nightmare. He understood everything and could see everything, but he couldn't shout or move. Tui Dao's triangular eyes were filled with fear. He looked on helplessly as Ning Shuama slowly stood up and smiled at him. Her smile was sweet, but in Tui Dao's eyes, it was filled with a sinister aura. "Sir, how do you feel?" Tuidao's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He wanted to reprimand her, but he couldn't make a sound. Little girl's medical skills are really good. Very good, very good. Tuidao didn't say anything, but he was shocked to hear his own voice ring out in the torture chamber. His eyes widened as he looked at Ning Shuama talking to herself. She could actually imitate his voice. And it was so vivid. The 4 jailers waiting outside the torture chamber were also worried about their superior. They had been listening to the movements inside, but when they heard this conversation, they finally relaxed. Tuidao had instructed them not to enter without his call, no matter what they heard. It was boring to wait outside, so the 4 of them walked away and found a card table to play mahjong. Sir, you don't want to let me go, right? You want me to treat your illness before torturing me, right? Ning Shuama spoke softly and softly, her breath like orchids beside his ear. Tuidao's cold sweat rolled down even more. He wanted to shake his head to deny it, but his brain wouldn't listen to him. Don't try to deny it. I already know what you're trying to do. Ning Shuama smiled. She unhurriedly took a small hammer from the table beside her and waved it in front of Tuidao. Come, be obedient and tell me. Who was it that wanted to plot against me and take my life? Tuidao couldn't answer, but his eyes kept darting around. Oh, I forgot that you can't speak now. How about this, I'll say the names one by one. If it's you, look down. If it's not you, move your eyes left and right. How about that? How could he dare to say that? Tuidao clenched his teeth and closed his eyes. Aya, you're really uncooperative. Looks like I have no choice but to use some extreme methods on you. Actually, I don't have the heart to do that either. Just as she finished speaking, the hammer in her hand had already hit Tuidao's left calf. Her technique was very special. Her seemingly casual tap landed right on the joint of his bones. With a light crack, his lower leg was directly fractured. The sharp pain caused Tuidao's body to suddenly tremble, and cold sweat instantly covered his face. He opened his eyes and stared at the giggling girl, almost suspecting that she was the reincarnation of a devil. Ning Shuama didn't want to talk nonsense with him. She asked him a question, but if he didn't answer, she would hit his bones with the hammer. Every time she hit him, she would break a piece of his bone. Tuidao didn't know how many people he had broken in his life, but he had never thought that he would fall to such a state one day. The pain of his broken bones pierced his heart, causing his face to turn white, then green. Cold sweat broke out all over his body. Although he couldn't scream or struggle, his face was already twisted to the extreme, making him look even more ugly than before. He originally thought that even if Ning Shuama had him restrained, she wouldn't really torture him. After all, this kind of torture required a very strong psychological endurance. Even if an ordinary person saw it, they wouldn't have the heart to do it. Not to mention doing it personally. Not to mention that the other party was a delicate little girl. However, Ning Shuama's expression didn't change as she broke the bones in his legs. Chapter 65. But when Ning Shuama broke his legs without batting an eyelid, he finally understood that the little girl in front of him was not an ordinary little girl, but a little devil. When Ning Shuama finished breaking his legs and began to move towards his spine, Tuidao finally couldn't take it anymore. His eyes revealed a pleading expression. Are you going to tell me? Ning Shuama stopped hammering and gently asked. Tuidao's eyes desperately moved up and down, indicating that he was nodding. Ning Shuama still had some regret. I thought Lord Tuidao's bones were very hard. So it turns out that you're only like this. I asked, was it the 6th prince? She began to list out names one by one. They were all her suspects. She mentioned the 6th prince, the crown prince, and the princess. When she mentioned the princess, Ji Yunyao, Tui Dao's eyes first moved to both sides, indicating denial. Then, as if he thought of something, his eyes began to move up and down, indicating acknowledgement. Was it really Ji Yunyao? With that girl's viciousness, it wasn't impossible for her to do it. Wasn't the girl who was tortured to death because of her? That girl had a special obsession with her crown prince Gage, and her jealousy was very strong. Perhaps as long as Ji Yunhuang treated any girl slightly better, it would incite her murderous intent. It was very possible that she would try to trip him up behind his back. Ning Xuema swung the small hammer in her hand and silently pondered. In the blink of an eye, she saw Tui Dao's pair of triangular eyes looking at her. He seemed a little guilty. Ning Xuema was an expert at reading people's expressions. She immediately smiled and used the small hammer in her hand to lift Tui Dao's chin. You're really naughty. You actually lied. Tui Dao's eyes moved furiously, indicating denial. Ning Xuema's charming face tensed up. I hate it when people lie to me. She raised the hammer in her hand and directly broke the bones in Tui Dao's chin. Tui Dao was in so much pain that his entire body curled up. His mouth was open like a toad's and his throat was emitting sounds. If he could move, he would have already rolled over. The cold sweat on his body completely soaked his clothes. He wanted to faint, but he couldn't. He was in extreme pain. Ning Xuema looked at him coldly. This guy had been tormenting others his whole life. Today, she would let him have a taste of what those people had gone through. She was the kind of person who would definitely repay kindness and hatred. She would definitely repay kindness and take revenge for enmity. She could treat her true friends like an angel, but she could also turn into a demon when dealing with evil people. Tui Dao was unlucky to have met her. The heavens were clear, and he deserved retribution. Ning Xuema's method of torturing people was not inferior to his, and this little girl's methods were faster and more accurate than his. If it wasn't for the fact that he was the one being tormented, he would have taken her in as his disciple. In less than an hour, Tui Dao's psychological defenses had been completely destroyed by her, and he was finally willing to tell the truth. When Ning Xuema mentioned the name of the current emperor, he finally nodded again. It was the emperor. Ning Xuema had just asked casually. She didn't expect to hit the nail on the head. Had the emperor eaten too much? He actually couldn't tolerate a little girl like her. Why? In the past, Marquis Ning had made a lot of contributions to the emperor in order to stabilize the country. He could be said to be the emperor's right-hand man. Why did he have to be so ruthless to the daughter of a meritorious official? Ning Xuema didn't really understand this society, so she couldn't figure it out for a while. Since she couldn't figure it out, she didn't want to waste her time thinking about it. Since the emperor wanted to kill her, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to get away with it easily. Chapter 66. Even if she waited until dawn, she wouldn't be able to escape death. She had to think of another way. It was really a tragedy. She had only transmigrated for a few days, yet she had already offended such a big boss. Was this transmigrator trying to test her abilities or play her to death? Waiting for death wasn't Ning Xuema's style. She had to think of a way to save herself and escape from this prison first. Her gaze fell on Tui Dao and she sized him up. Her gaze was too unpredictable, causing Tui Dao's heart to tremble. Ning Xuema searched his body and finally took out the knife that he often used to skin people. She spun it in her palm and gently discussed with Tui Dao, I saw that you were very skilled at skinning people, and I really want to learn. I'll try it on you. If I don't do it well, you'll have to bear with it. Tui Dao's face instantly turned green, and his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. This debt of 6 months was really repaid quickly. He had just finished skinning a girl's face, and immediately another girl came to skin him. He enjoyed skinning other people's faces, but having his face skinned was definitely his worst nightmare. He looked on helplessly as Ning Xuemo slowly walked over, the thin knife in her hand emitting a terrifying cold light. 2 hours passed, and then another 2 hours passed. Finally, 6 hours passed. The 4 prison guards who were playing Pai Gao outside were already tired. They were also playing Pai Gao weekly, but they didn't dare to sleep. They were naturally worried about their boss, but because Ning Xuemo said that she needed absolute silence during the treatment, they didn't dare to disturb her. They were afraid that they would affect the treatment. The 4 of them were playing Pai Gao when they were suddenly startled by a blood-curdling scream. The 4 of them looked at each other in dismay. They threw their Pai Gao cards on the table and ran towards the torture room. The blood-curdling scream came from a girl. It came one after another, and each scream was more frightening than the last. When the 4 of them were about to reach the torture room, the blood-curdling scream suddenly stopped as if it had been cut off. The 4 of them looked at each other again. Someone asked tentatively, "Boss, what's wrong? You've already made your move." Although the scream just now didn't sound like a human's, it was obvious that it came from a girl. Needless to say, Tu Yidao had started to torture the girl. "You guys can come in." Tu Yidao's voice came from behind the door. The 4 of them then pushed the door open and entered. The inside of the door was simply a slaughterhouse. The girl was nailed to the wall in the shape of the Chinese character. Her clothes were tattered, and her body was cut so badly that it was almost impossible to see her original skin. Her lower body was also cut into pieces, and it was impossible to tell her gender. There was even a red-hot iron bar stuck in that area, a face. To be exact, she no longer had a face. It was just a mess of flesh and blood, and one could barely make out her facial features. She convulsed there, convulsing, and blood dripped down, watering the blood stains left by the young girl. Although this scene was cruel, the 4 prison guards were already used to it. Therefore, they only casually glanced at the girl before looking directly at Tu Yidao, who was sitting in a wheelchair. Their gazes lingered on his legs. "Boss, was that girl lying to you?" "Your legs." "I knew it. Boss's legs couldn't be cured by so many famous doctors. How could it be cured by a little girl?" "Yes, yes. That little girl was obviously stalling for time. Boss saw through her and severely punished her." Chapter 67. Yes, yes, that little girl was clearly stalling for time. Our boss saw through her and punished her severely. Yes, yes, that little girl deserved a lesson. She made our boss angry and punished her personally. That idiot, she won't be able to escape death no matter how long she delayed. "Boss, are you tired? Let us take care of the rest." The 4 of them flattered him while rubbing their fists. Tu Yidao, who was in his wheelchair, slowly got up and took 2 steps forward. Under the gazes of his 4 subordinates, he patted his robes and yawned. "Yes, you guys will take care of the rest. I'm afraid of noise today, so I burned her throat. She won't be able to say anything. Once she confesses, we'll deal with her according to the original plan." The 4 subordinates were surprised to see him walking so steadily. Naturally, they congratulated him and flattered him. Tu Yidao, who had always been cold, only nodded indifferently. Everyone was already used to his attitude, so they didn't suspect him and asked him to rest. They would take care of the rest. Tu Yidao yawned again and said, "Then I'll have to trouble you, brothers. If this matter is done well, everyone will be rewarded." Then, he left amidst the flattery of his 4 subordinates. When the girl on the wall saw the 4 of them enter, her eyes lit up. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but her throat was destroyed, so she could only make a snoring sound. seeing that the four of them were ignoring her, despair appeared in her eyes. After Tuidao left, the four of them slowly walked towards her. One of them held a knife, one of them held a pair of tongs, and one of them held a hammer. Looking at her badly mutilated body, they grinned maliciously. "Little girl, your medical skills are very good. You actually cured our boss's chronic illness. However, our boss is famous for turning hostile. Did you think that he would let you off for a night just because you cured his illness? TSK, you're too naive. He'll do whatever he wants to do to you. Our boss is still so straightforward. Her leg bones are all broken." One of them rejoiced in her misfortune as he poked at her noodle-like leg. Sigh, she was such a clever little girl just now. Her appearance was also quite decent, but now she has become like this. TSK, we originally wanted to let you have a taste of a man before the torture. Now that we're looking at you like a pile of rotten meat, we can't bring up any interest. One of them seemed to be regretful. Hehe, Lao-san, do you think our boss had already tasted something fresh before the torture? Another person laughed, his wretched gaze sweeping over the people on the wall. Isn't that obvious? Haven't I already given her the ecstasy stick? Every time the boss tasted something fresh, he would give it to the women. The third brother also glanced at the spot on the wall. His entire body was a mess of flesh and blood, and no shape could be seen anymore. The four of them yawned out of boredom. They only wanted to complete their mission and catch up on sleep. They went up to the woman nailed to the wall and used all kinds of wicked methods to force her to confess. The four of them were probably too sleepy and forgot that the girl's vocal cords had already been destroyed. After using a few torture methods, they made the girl hover between life and death a few times before they remembered that she couldn't speak. One of them asked her to nod and shake her head. The person on the wall hurriedly nodded. The four of them finally heaved a sigh of relief. They took out the prepared confession and asked her to sign it. Chapter 68. The skin on the girl's hands was also cut off, leaving only a small piece of skin on her thumb. Probably due to the intense pain, her hands were trembling. With great difficulty, she managed to write a few words, but it almost made the four jailers' noses crooked. She wrote, "I am Tuidao." Damn it. She actually dared to pretend to be their leader at this time. The four of them impolitely tortured her again, making her feel like she was rolling in hell a few times. Only then did they take out a backup statement for her to sign. Unexpectedly, after she wrote those 5 words, she wrote another sentence with trembling hands, "I am Tuidao. I was plotted against." She peeled my skin and pretended to be me. Under the intense pain, the words she wrote were like a dog crawling, crooked, but fortunately, the four of them saw it clearly. The four of them originally thought she was playing tricks again. 3 of them cursed and wanted to use the cruelest punishment on her again. The third brother was more careful and stopped the others. Could it be true? He was the one who used his hands the most. Although the skin on the girl's body was cut into a mess, he still faintly felt that it did not feel like a young girl's skin. The four of them looked at each other and began to check her body while suppressing their disgust. After a moment, the four of them slowly took a step back. Although the sexual characteristics of the people who were tortured were severely damaged, the four of them often tortured people after all, so they had a very clear understanding of the human body structure. The girl in front of them indeed did not have the characteristics of a young girl, and she was not young either. Could it be that she was really swapped? The one they were torturing was their leader, Tuidao. 4 pairs of eyes looked at the girl. The girl's eyes showed a glimmer of hope. Ignoring the pain, she desperately gestured to the 4 of them. This was a common gesture between them, outsiders would not know. Because her body was nailed, the range of movement of her arms was very small, so her gestures were also very slow and difficult, but it was not bad at all. The third brother blurted out, "God, she really is our leader." He jumped over and wanted to untie the girl. The leader of the four reached out and stopped him. He gloomily looked at the girl and suddenly sneered, "You still want to pretend to be our leader? You must be tired of living. Second brother, fourth brother, prepare the torture tools. It seems like she won't confess if we don't do something to her." They absolutely could not recognize Tu Yidao. Tu Yidao had a cold and gloomy personality. He was a petty person who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. Just now, they had unknowingly used a lot of punishment on him. With his character, he would definitely hold a grudge in his heart. If he survived, the four of them would definitely suffer his cruel revenge. The only thing he could do now was to make the best of it. The other three also understood. They looked at each other and also chose to go with the flow. Tu Yidao was in complete despair. He was the one who came up with all the punishments here. He never thought that he would have to taste them one by one today. Naturally, he knew about scraping, and it was precisely because he knew about it that he felt even more despair. He couldn't bear the punishment. Moreover, these four people would not let him get away with it. They had already made up their minds to make the best of it. If he wanted to suffer less, he could only confess according to what they said. Chapter 69. Tu Yidao's hands were nimble, and he imitated a good handwriting. He was usually proud of it, but now it had become his death sentence. The four prison guards were finally relieved after obtaining all the items. The boss patted Tu Yidao's body with his knife and said, "Boss, don't blame us. Who asked you to be tricked by a little girl? Moreover, all of this was arranged by you long ago. We were only acting according to your original instructions. Rest in peace." Stabbing his heart with a knife, he ended his life cleanly and cleanly. Following the steps they had discussed beforehand, they burned Tu Yidao's body to the ground. These were all orders from the higher-ups. After they got Ning Xuema's confession and suicide note, they disposed of the body to prevent people from using torture to extort a confession. Originally, the plan was flawless. However, they didn't expect that they would encounter Ning Xuema, who was an anomaly. After the four of them disposed of all traces, they finally remembered that Ning Xuema had pretended to be Tu Yidao. They ran to the entrance of the prison and asked around. They heard that Sir Tu had left in the middle of the night. He probably went home to sleep. The four of them naturally recognized Tu Yidao's house, so they went there. Just as they expected, Tu Yidao didn't come back. Tu Yidao's disappearance couldn't be explained. The four of them discussed for a while and suddenly came up with an idea. They found a beggar that looked like Tu Yidao and got him drunk. Then, they led him to the only big lake in the city. Along the way, there were people who saw Tu Yidao, but no one paid attention to this drunkard. After everything was done, the four of them pushed the drunkard into the lake and watched him drown. Only then did they feel relieved. This big lake raised a type of ferocious beast that was as fierce as a crocodile. No matter what fell into the water, it would be eaten by these ferocious beasts and not a single bone would be left behind. Therefore, they weren't afraid that someone would find the body for an autopsy. The only thing that worried them was Ning Xuema. If she ran far away and never showed up again, they wouldn't be afraid. He was afraid that the girl would want to overturn the case and come back to seek justice. This was destined to be a sleepless night. The four of them each found their own good friends from all walks of life to secretly search for Ning Xuema's whereabouts in the city. Of course, they also went to investigate Marquis Jingyuan's mansion. At daybreak, news came back from all sides. No one had found any trace of Ning Xuema. Of course, she did not return to Marquis Jingyuan's mansion either. It seemed like that cunning little girl had already escaped from the city. At this point, the four of them had no other choice but to secretly send people to search outside the city, instructing them to kill them as soon as they found them to prevent future trouble. The four of them were exhausted after a night of torment, but they couldn't go back to rest. Someone would come to collect their statements at dawn, so they had to rush back. Ji Yunhuang stayed in the imperial palace for an entire night. He stayed by the bedside of the current emperor, Lu Hinti, and did not leave for even a moment. Only when the sun rose did Lu Hinti allow him to return. Hurriedly leaving the imperial palace, he ran into the crown prince's mansion's housekeeper, who had been bitterly waiting outside the imperial palace. The housekeeper reported to him a piece of bad news that made him feel as if he had been struck by lightning. The eldest miss of the Ning family, whom he had brought back to the crown prince's mansion, had been arrested by the Ministry of Justice last night. She was suspected of murdering the marshal's daughter, Hu Daichang. Chapter 70. Without another word, Ji Yunhuang rushed to the Ministry of Justice and barged into the main hall of the Ministry of Justice. He found Lord Lu, who had personally led the troops to the Crown Prince's residence. Lord Lu smiled apologetically and told him that they had already sent Ning Xuema to the Ministry of Justice's prison last night. Lord Lu had already confessed everything and even took out her confession statement. When Ji Yunhuang heard that Ning Xuema had been sent to the Ministry of Justice's prison, his expression changed greatly. Others might not know what this prison was, but how could he not know? He had accidentally entered it before and knew the methods of the jailers inside. Even a man with a steel-like willpower would be tormented into a pulp in that place, unable to leave once he entered. What's more, Ning Xuema was such a delicate little girl. She had been trapped in there for the entire night, alone and helpless. How scared must she have been? His eyes quickly scanned through the confession statement and threw it on the ground. He sneered, "This prince does not believe it. This prince saw everything that happened in the tea house yesterday. She didn't do anything to Hu Daichang. They only had a small argument and she didn't do anything to Hu Daichang. Instead, it was Hu Daichang who hit and slashed her. If not for her nimble body, she would have suffered a great loss." Lord Lu smiled apologetically. Perhaps she held a grudge against Hu Daichang and entered the marshal's residence to poison Miss Hu. A bunch of nonsense. Ji Yunhuang's expression became colder. She was injured in the tea house and it was this prince who brought her back to the crown prince's residence. Where did she find the time to poison Hu Daichang? Perhaps she secretly went out to kill someone when the crown prince was not in the residence. This is even more nonsense. Let me ask you, when did Hu Daichang die? Around 7:15. That's even more wrong. This prince left the crown prince's residence at 7:15. Before that, she was always with this prince. How could she go out to kill someone? Lord Lu was rendered speechless by his rebuttal. Perhaps she sent someone in secret. Who knows? She did admit to her crime. Once she entered, even if she was a man, she would have admitted to it. Where is she now? The crown prince, who had always been calm and collected, could no longer remain calm. He grabbed Lord Lu's collar and lifted him up. His murderous intent was too strong. Lord Lu could not help but tremble. This morning, she committed suicide in the Ministry of Justice's prison, dead. Bang! Lord Lu fell to the ground with a loud thud. Ji Yunhuang's figure flashed and disappeared out of the Ministry of Justice's residence. Lord Lu's bones hurt so badly that he could not get up. He was so shocked that his face turned ashen, and he was unable to regain his senses for a long time. After being an official for so many years, this was the first time he had seen the Crown Prince so angry. His Highness the Crown Prince did not value the little girl. Inside the torture chamber of the Ministry of Justice, although the Crown Prince of Hell, the Crown Princesses of the Imperial residence was of Jesus, pungent, the smell. After Ji Yunhuang circled around the torture chamber, his heart sank to the bottom of the valley. The instruments of torture were stained with blood. Between the gaps, he found the remnants of Ning Xuemo's tattered clothes. Those tattered clothes were soaked with blood, showing what kind of torture the owner of those clothes had gone through last night. The 4 prison guards who were in charge of the punishment trembled as they knelt there. They watched as the crown prince looked around the torture chamber. Every step he took was like stepping on their hearts. They did not expect that the crown prince would personally come and carefully inspect. Chapter 71. Is she really dead? Ji Yunhuang finally stopped and asked from a commanding position. Yes. Yes, she committed suicide to escape punishment. The jailer replied. These were the lines they had rehearsed beforehand. Where is the body? Burned. Burned, burned. Ji Yunhuang was furious. He could no longer suppress his murderous aura. Who gave you the courage? His anger caused the surrounding temperature to drop by several degrees. The 4 jailers trembled even more violently as they prostrated themselves on the ground. Reporting to Crown Prince, after Miss Ning died, we immediately reported it. The higher-up said that the weather was too hot to store the body. After all, Miss Ning was Marquis Ning's daughter. Since she had already confessed and committed suicide, we would not pursue the matter any further. We were afraid that her body would rot in the prison, so we were ordered to cremate it and place it in an urn to be sent back to Marquis Jingyuan's residence. This was also the script they had prepared beforehand. Ji Yunhuang's hands and feet were ice cold. At this moment, he already understood that this was a trap. This trap was most likely set up by his imperial father. Lu Hinti first trapped him in the imperial palace, then sent people to capture Ning Xuemo and interrogate her overnight. She had no choice but to confess after being tortured and isolated. Then, she was killed. Although he had guessed the mastermind behind this trap, he did not understand why Lu Hinti would deliberately plot against a little girl. She had no power, no influence, and no one to rely on. She was not a threat to the imperial power, right? He was puzzled. Ning Xuemo's smiling face seemed to flash in front of his eyes. His heart felt as if it had been pierced by a needle. The girl who was smiling at him last night had died just like that. She clearly had a special ability. She clearly had the ability to shine in Chongkong country. He turned to look at the torture tools on the 4 walls and then looked at the 4 jailers kneeling on the ground. His eyes flashed with a fierce light as he slowly asked, "Where is Tui Dao? Tell him to come see this prince." The 4 of them followed the plan they had discussed beforehand and reported Tui Dao's whereabouts. They said that after he left the prison last night, he got drunk and slipped into the Sunset Lake. They only knew about it when someone came to report to them this morning. Ji Yunhuang was somewhat puzzled. According to what he knew, Tui Dao was not a good drinker. It could be said that he rarely drank. He had once said that people who drank often had unstable hands. What he did for a living was an extremely delicate job, so it was impossible for his hands to be unstable. How could such a person get drunk? This doubt flashed through Ji Yunhuang's mind, but he didn't take it to heart. To him, the life and death of such a person was of no concern to him. His gaze landed back on the 4 people. Since you can't find him, then this king will ask you, how many punishments did you use on Miss Ning last night? The 4 of them naturally did not dare to admit it. They desperately kowtowed and denied it. How could Ji Yunhuang not know their tricks? His gaze was cold, and so was his voice. It doesn't matter if you don't admit it. This king will let you have a taste of all the torture tools in this torture chamber. He couldn't save her in time, so he would avenge her. The sun was shining brightly outside. Ji Yunhuang stood outside the Ministry of Justice's prison. He looked up at the sun hanging in the sky and sighed softly. In just one night, everything had changed. That clever little girl had already died. He would never be able to see her again. Chapter 72. Your Highness, shall we return to the residence? His personal bodyguard bowed and invited him to enter the carriage. Ji Yunhuang looked at the carriage. Yesterday, he had used this carriage to bring Ning Xuemo into the Crown Prince's residence. The carriage was still the same carriage, but that person was nowhere to be seen. Ji Yunhuang waved his hand. Burn this carriage. He would burn it for her. He jumped onto the horse and with a shake of the reins, the horse galloped away. The bodyguards looked at each other in dismay. This carriage did not look too special, but regardless of whether it was the materials or workmanship, they were all of the highest quality. It could be said that it was the Crown Prince's favorite carriage. Usually, it was meticulously maintained and did not allow for the slightest bit of damage. Now, he wanted to burn it. No one dared to disobey the Crown Prince's orders. The bodyguard leader immediately arranged for a group of people to burn the carriage, while another group of people chased after the Crown Prince to protect him. Outside the newly painted Marquis Jingyuan's residence, a white banner was hung, and the residence was filled with cries. Ji Yunhuang reined in his horse and stood in front of the Marquis Jingyuan's residence. He looked inside and sighed softly before turning around to leave. He knew that no one who entered the Ministry of Justice's prison would survive, so he did not have the slightest suspicion towards Ning Xuemo's death. He did not want to go in and look at her coffin. At most, there would only be a handful of ashes inside. It was no longer her. Even if he went in, it would only increase his grief. Ji Yunhuang did not sleep for the entire night, so he was somewhat tired. He returned to his own residence and prepared to rest well before doing anything else. He emotionlessly pushed open the door to his sleeping quarters. Suddenly, he sensed something. A light flashed in his palm and a long sword appeared out of thin air. He lifted the bed curtain. After clearly seeing the scene on the bed, the usually calm and collected Ji Yunhuang could not help but be stunned. On the bed, there was a person sleeping under the brocade quilt. Her black hair was spread out on the pillow, her small face was rosy, and her long eyelashes were slightly closed. She was sleeping soundly. It was the Ning Xuemo that everyone said was already dead. Ji Yunhuang could not believe his eyes. He subconsciously rubbed his eyes and slowly walked forward. The little fellow was probably too tired and was not alert enough. He was already close to the bed, but she was still sleeping soundly. His fingers gently caressed her cheek. It was warm and soft. She was real. It was alive. Ji Yunhuang almost thought that he was dreaming when he saw a dead and burnt person suddenly appear on his bed. Whether it was Lord Liu or the 4 prison guards, none of them dared to lie. Then what was going on? Ji Yunhuang stood beside the bed in a daze. No matter how he thought about it, he couldn't understand. His vision suddenly blurred, and the brocade quilt on the bed flew up, covering him from head to toe. Although Ji Yunhuang was caught off guard, he was still a top-notch expert. His body retreated backwards like flowing water. With a wave of his hand, the brocade quilt floated to the ground. The little person who had been lying on the bed was now standing on the ground, with a short sword in his hand, pointing diagonally at him. After clearly seeing Ji Yunhuang's face, Ning Xuemo heaved a sigh of relief. She lowered the dagger in her hand and smiled, revealing her dimples. "You scared me. Your Highness, you've finally returned." The little girl's vigilance was quite high. Ji Yunhuang's eyes revealed admiration, and the corners of his mouth hooked up into a smile. "You're the one who scared this prince. Come, tell this prince. How did you escape from the Ministry of Justice's prison?" He was dying of curiosity. When Ning Xuema heard his tone, she knew that he already knew the general situation. Chapter 73. When Ning Xuema heard his tone, she knew that he already knew the gist of the matter. She pursed her lips and said, "Crown Prince, I am innocent. Hu Jichang's death has nothing to do with me. I didn't kill her." Ji Yunhuang nodded slightly. "This prince understands. This prince is curious about how you managed to escape." Ning Xuema sighed. "This matter is a long story. Xuema almost couldn't see Your Highness the Crown Prince. Let me drink some water first." She felt that her throat was extremely dry. Last night, she had peeled off Tu Yidao's skin and used the opportunity to disguise herself as him to escape from the prison. Her understanding of the human heart was not ordinary. She knew that Tu Yidao would not be able to survive. After the 4 prison guards tortured Tu Yidao, even if they knew that they had gotten the wrong person, they would still make the best of it. They would even help her clean up the mess. Thus, she did not need to stay and watch. In her previous life, she had killed many people and performed many surgeries. Originally, using a knife to cut a human body was a common occurrence for her. Thus, she was able to do it when she tortured Tu Yidao. However, surgery and torture were 2 different concepts. The former could anesthetize a person, while the latter was a living person. The feeling of doing it was different. Ning Xuema looked calm on the surface. Her hands were steady, but her stomach was churning. She was about to vomit. Especially since she had to disguise herself as Tu Yidao. She had no choice but to wear his skin like a mask. Her nose was filled with the smell of blood, causing her stomach to churn even more. After hurriedly leaving the prison, she found a secluded corner to vomit. He hurriedly tore off his face and stole a set of clothes from a clothing store. Then, he took advantage of the night and jumped into a small river to take a bath. Because she was a little traumatized, she felt that Tu Yidao's dirty blood was still on her body. Thus, she took a long bath. After soaking for an hour, she changed into a new set of clothes. Only when she could no longer smell the smell of blood did she feel better. If it was any other girl, they would have escaped far away from the city. It would be best if they could escape from Changkong country and never come back. This time, they could only suffer in silence. But Ning Xuema didn't want to run away. She had never been the type to endure humiliation. What was the difference between running away and not daring to say anything after being wronged? Since she had taken on the title of Ning Mansion's eldest miss, she couldn't tarnish this girl's reputation. She wanted to clear her name. Even if she had to leave in the future, she wanted to clear her name and leave openly. She couldn't let the people behind her see her as a joke. Besides, she had just revived the Jingyuan mansion, and there was still a large group of people waiting for her to raise. More importantly, the chastity testing beast was still being raised in her mansion. That little fellow was quite loyal. She didn't want to abandon it like this. More importantly, Hu Jichang's case shouldn't be too difficult to solve. As long as she could escape for the night, she would be able to rely on Ji Yunhuang's influence to make a comeback. She had been too busy that night, and her little body couldn't take it anymore. She urgently needed to sleep somewhere to replenish her strength. Where was the safest place? Where was her safe haven? Of course, it was the Crown Prince's palace. Therefore, after Ning Xuema finished bathing, she immediately rushed to the Crown Prince's mansion. Along the way, she happened to see the 4 jailers throwing a fake Tu Yidao into the lake. She hid in a dark place. After the 4 jailers left, she threw Tu Yidao's clothes and human skin, one by one into the lake. Chapter 74. Because Ji Yunhuang wasn't in the residence and Lord Lu had brazenly taken her away from the Crown Prince's residence, the people in the residence were very busy and their defenses were much more lax than usual. Therefore, Ning Xuema was able to sneak in easily. Without the Crown Prince's permission, no one dared to enter the Crown Prince's sleeping quarters. Therefore, Ning Xuema slept soundly and didn't even dream. Perhaps it was because she had soaked in the river for too long last night, but when she woke up, she felt a little dizzy. She raised her hand to touch her head and cursed in her heart. Her head was a little hot. She had caught a cold. No wonder she, who was usually alert, slept so soundly that she only noticed the Crown Prince after a long time. She naturally couldn't tell him the truth about how she escaped. Fortunately, she knew that Ji Yunhuang would definitely ask about it and had already prepared an excuse. Now that Ji Yunhuang asked, she straightforwardly told him the excuse she had prepared. She said that when she was in the Ministry of Justice's prison, Tui Dao originally wanted to torture her. However, she saw through his illness and used it as a condition to make a deal with Tui Dao. She would completely cure his illness and he would try to find a way to let her out. Tui Dao agreed. She used half a night to completely cure him. She was afraid that Tui Dao would go back on his word, so she purposely held back and said that she would do the final treatment after she regained her freedom. In order to completely cure his illness, Tui Dao disguised her as a corpse and sent her out of the prison. After she escaped from the prison, she felt that she had been wronged and didn't want to escape. Therefore, she came to find the Crown Prince. She didn't forget to flatter Ji Yunhuang. Xuema knows that your highness abhors evil and wouldn't have the heart to let Xuema be wronged. You would definitely give Xuema justice, so I came to see your highness. Her words were 70% true and 30% false. It could be said that her plan was flawless. Ji Yunhuang glanced at her and smiled faintly. Tui Dao's legs couldn't be cured by the imperial physicians in the palace. Can you cure him in one night? Ning Xuema smiled. Your Highness, have you forgotten? Xuema had excellent medical skills. Of course, if your Highness doesn't believe me, you can go and interrogate Tui Dao. However, he's afraid of being held responsible, so I'm afraid he won't easily confess. However, your Highness definitely has other ways to make him speak the truth. Tui Dao is dead, Ji Yunhuang said. Ning Xuema's eyes widened. Dead? He was clearly fine last night. Her face was filled with disbelief. Ji Yunhuang sized her up again. Her eyes were as clear as water and did not seem to be fake at all. He didn't know what to feel. This girl, even he couldn't see through her. She looked innocent and pure, but she was actually a cunning little fox. Ji Yunhuang chuckled. I heard that he got drunk this morning and fell into the lake to his death. Could it be that his legs were cured and he was so happy that he broke his vows and got drunk and lost his life? Ning Xuema had a look of realization on her face. She said with some regret, so that's how it is. She really felt sorry for him. It wasn't easy for him to walk and his good days had just begun. Actually, when Ji Yunhuang was released from the Ministry of Justice's prison, he had already sent people to investigate Tui Dao. When he found out that Tui Dao had walked out of the Ministry of Justice's prison by himself, the guards even congratulated him several times. Although Ji Yunhuang wasn't familiar with Tui Dao, he had heard of his character. He knew that those who fell into his hands would never be able to escape unscathed. However, he didn't expect that Ning Xuema would use this method to save herself. Chapter 75. Tui Dao's legs had been injured for a long time. Now that there was hope in front of him, it was not surprising that he would be tempted. However, he did not expect that he would have the guts to let her go like this. He thought of something and asked Ning Xuema, "Did you confess in the Ministry of Justice's prison?" Ning Xuema shook her head. "I didn't kill anyone, so of course I didn't." Ji Yunhuang thought of the confession in Lord Lu's hands and his heart skipped a beat. Shuama, write a few words for me to see. Since Ning Shuama was a secret agent in her previous life, she naturally had the ability to imitate all kinds of handwriting. She immediately wrote a few words and imitated the original Ning Shuama's handwriting. Ji Yunhuang picked it up and looked at it. He was an expert in calligraphy, so he still remembered the signature on the confession. At this moment, he compared it with Ning Shuama's handwriting in his mind. The corner of his lips slightly hooked up as he understood everything. At first glance, the two handwriting looked very similar, but it could not escape the eyes of a calligraphy expert like him. The signature on the confession was fake. It seemed that Tui Dao had received a death order. He had to force out a confession last night and then kill her and burn her to silence her. However, it was because of this order that Tui Dao dared to do this kind of thing. He used the trick of substituting one person for another to release her. Then, he found someone to imitate Ning Shuama's handwriting to sign the confession and write a suicide note. If Ning Shuama did not come to find him, he was afraid that even he would not be able to deceive her. However, was Tui Dao the kind of person who would secretly release someone like this? Based on his character, even if it was to treat his legs, he would not leave such a big scourge in the world. Perhaps there was something else that he did not know. He glanced at Ning Shuama again. The little girl was combing her hair. The peachwood comb glided through her black hair, which was as soft as satin. The way she combed her hair was very beautiful. Ji Yunhuang could not help but look at her a few more times. What do you plan to do next? Ji Yunhuang asked her. Ning Shuama looked at him with a pair of big eyes. Of course it's to ask the Crown Prince to testify for me and clear my name. Ji Yunhuang pondered for a moment before finally making a decision. All right, let this prince rest for 2 hours before entering the palace to clear your name. Ning Shuama was puzzled. Since your highness can clear Shuama's name, why don't you take action immediately? Ji Yunhuang yawned and said, Little Shuama, I didn't sleep at all last night. You have to let me rest so that I can have the energy to redress your grievances, right? Fine. Then she would listen to him. She would wait for a few more hours. Ning Shuama agreed. As a former Secret Service agent, patience was the one thing she did not lack. To be honest, she had only slept for a little more than 2 hours last night, so she was still a little sleepy. She impolitely jumped onto the large bed and beamed at Ji Yunhuang as she said, Your Highness the Crown Prince wants to sleep on the soft rope bed? I see that Your Highness the Crown Prince is as stable as Mount Tai. Your Highness must be used to sleeping on it. Shuama's martial arts are not good enough, so she will definitely fall off the soft rope bed. She can only sleep on the bed. By the time she finished speaking, she had already crawled into bed. Ji Yunhuang was originally taking off his outer robe, but when he heard what she said, his fingers paused. He looked at her with a smile that was not a smile. You actually dare to say that? She was fighting for his bed, and yet she was so bold and confident. In this world, she was probably the only one. Ning Shuama looked as if she could not open her eyes. She raised her hand and rubbed them. Could it be that Your Highness is not willing? Ah, forget it. Shuama will just curl up on the chair and rest for a while. As she spoke, she lifted the blanket and was about to get off the bed. Chapter 76. Ji Yunhuang raised his hand to stop her from lifting the quilt. All right, you can rest here. Don't let others think that I'm bullying a child. He probably felt that her hand was a little warm and slightly frowned. Do you have a fever? Ning Shuama calmly withdrew her hand. This small body is a little weak. I caught a cold last night. Her voice was slightly nasal. She was born with watery eyes. Coupled with a small cold, Her face was red and she looked particularly pitiful. Ji Yunhuang's heart was moved. Without saying anything, he pulled her up and sat her up. "Let me treat you." Because the people of Chongkong continent generally had psychokinesis, they rarely caught a cold. However, once they caught a cold, it was not easy to recover. It must be treated at the beginning of the cold to recover quickly. Logically speaking, the original Ning Xuemo was a psychokinesis trash and should have caught a cold frequently. However, perhaps because she was poor and often suffered from wind and frost, it was easy to feed the children of the poor. Although she was thin and sallow from hunger, she had never caught a cold before. Who knew what would happen if this small body caught a cold? When she felt uncomfortable, she had already used acupuncture and massage to treat it. If it was in her era, this method would have cured her immediately. Therefore, after the massage, she went to bed. She did not expect that after sleeping, not only did she not show any signs of getting better, her cold seemed to have worsened. Her head was a little dizzy and her nose was a little stuffy. She originally did not care about this cold, but now that she saw Ji Yunhuang's serious expression, her heart was moved. She still had a lot of things to do and did not have time to recuperate. She wanted to see how this era treated colds and learn a thing or two. Therefore, she did not refuse and said, "Thank you, Your Highness." She sat there and watched his movements. Ji Yunhuang sat across from her. He pulled her hand over and placed it against hers. The psychokinesis in his palm flowed into her body like water. This method was a bit like the healing scene in martial arts dramas. Ning Xuemo only felt a warm and ethereal force enter her body from her palm and flow through her meridians. Wherever it passed, it felt cool and refreshing. Her somewhat congested blood vessels seemed to show signs of being unblocked. She felt her body heating up, and beads of sweat appeared on the tip of her nose. Her originally clogged nose also began to breathe. Psychokinesis was indeed the best way to treat colds. His psychokinesis went one round inside her body, and it was as if he had taken a special antipyretic. The effect was immediate. The psychokinesis in this world was truly amazing. If she had psychokinesis, coupled with her medical skills, she would be even more outstanding. She was slightly distracted. When Ji Yunhuang's psychokinesis flowed through her meridians and reached her dantian, that lively and flowing psychokinesis suddenly disappeared without a trace. Retracting it just like that. Ning Xuemo opened her eyes. Just as she was about to urge him to help her to the end and use his psychokinesis to scan all the blood vessels in her body, she did not expect that Ji Yunhuang would look at her in astonishment. His expression was a little strange. "What's wrong?" "That's it." Ning Xuemo stretched her arms and legs. She was half relaxed and half sore. Ji Yunhuang sized her up. "You didn't take the opportunity to absorb this king's psychokinesis." Ning Xuemo was really puzzled this time. "Absorb your psychokinesis? How could that be? You were treating my illness, why would I absorb your psychokinesis?" Ji Yunhuang also seemed to have understood something. "You shouldn't be absorbing this king's psychokinesis on purpose." Chapter 77. Only a psychokinesis expert who practiced some kind of evil technique would be able to absorb other people's psychokinesis. However, Ning Xuemo was a psychokinesis trash. Even if she wanted to absorb psychokinesis, she did not have the ability to do so. Then what happened just now? When his psychokinesis reached her dantian, it disappeared without a trace like a clay ox entering the sea. Not only that, he felt his arm tighten and all the psychokinesis in his body crazily flowed out. If he was not smart enough to withdraw his hand in time, he would have lost a lot of his psychokinesis. He looked at Ning Xuemo. In Chong Kong continent, those who could absorb other people's psychokinesis were all from evil sections. Moreover, their skills were at least at the second level of Earth rank. Even if it was a peerless genius, it would take at least 20 years for them to cultivate. However, Ning Xuemo was only 13 years old. Even if she practiced this technique in her mother's womb, she would not be able to do it. Furthermore, she did not have any psychokinesis in her body. His heart was bewildered, but he did not show it on his face. He pulled her hand again. Just now, I was probably too tired and misunderstood. Come, let's do it again. He transferred his psychokinesis to her again. He looked the same as before, but he was a lot more cautious. He used his psychokinesis to unblock the other half of her meridians and slowly walked through her dantian. He condensed his psychokinesis into a line and was prepared to withdraw his psychokinesis at any time. However, he did not expect that this time, he did not feel anything. His psychokinesis wandered around her dantian for a while and then continued to move forward. Could it be that he was too tired and misunderstood? After half an hour, Ning Xuemo was drenched in sweat under Ji Yunhuang's psychokinesis. The feeling of dizziness had completely disappeared. After waiting for Ji Yunhuang to finish his cultivation, she jumped up with a smile on her face. Your Highness is indeed capable. My cold is completely cured. She jumped up too quickly and accidentally tripped on the quilt. Her body tilted and she threw herself into Ji Yunhuang's arms. Ji Yunhuang subconsciously opened his arms, not forgetting to tease her, "She's throwing herself at me." Before she could finish her sentence, just as she was about to fall into his arms, Ning Xuemo's palm suddenly slapped forward, right on his chest. She used the momentum of this slap to twist her body, regaining her footing at an unexpected angle. He could even smell the faint fragrance of sweat on her body, but he hugged nothing but air. Instead, he received a palm strike on his chest. If it wasn't for his high level of martial arts, her palm strike would have knocked him down. His body swayed slightly. He looked at Ning Xuemo with a deep gaze. What kind of lightness skill did this little girl practice? Despite his vast knowledge and experience, he had never seen such a sight before. After Ning Xuemo steadied herself, she heaved a sigh of relief. However, when she suddenly received Ji Yunhuang's gaze, her heart skipped a beat. She was a special agent, so she had an instinctive aversion to anyone who approached her. That slap just now was purely an instinctive reaction, and her body acted before her brain. After finishing the action, she realized that she had gone overboard with her actions. She coughed and smiled. Xuemo lost her footing and almost fell onto Your Highness the Crown Prince. I'm sorry for my rudeness. Please forgive me, Your Highness. Ji Yunhuang was speechless. Her slap was not rudeness. What kind of logic was that? This little girl's reaction speed was not ordinary. Moreover, she was subconsciously on guard against him. Chapter 78. Ning Xuemo felt somewhat apologetic towards him. If her slap had landed on a normal person, that person would have been sent flying. I'm sorry, Your Highness. It was Xuemo who was rude. I apologize. She sincerely bowed to him. Ji Yunhuang's eyes were deep as he looked at her for a moment before he sighed in disgust. Forget it, I won't lower myself to the same level as you. Just treat it as you owe me a favor. You're sweating all over, quickly go and wash yourself. Just now, Ning Xuemo's entire body was drenched in sweat, soaking her gauze dress. Now that it was stuck to her body, it was sticky and uncomfortable. This crown prince was indeed misophobic. Just a moment ago he was affectionate, but now his face was full of disgust. However, his expression made Ning Xuemo inwardly sigh in relief. This crown prince's expression was a little strange, giving her the illusion that he liked her. Now it seemed that she was just being paranoid. Although her mental age was already over 20 years old, her body was still only 13 years old. She was still a little lowly and was still at the age where she could play as she pleased. She still wanted to live a carefree life on this continent, so she did not want to repeatedly attract love debts and bring trouble to herself. Especially when the other party was a crown prince with a high position and power. He was not someone she could afford to provoke. If he was really moved by her and wanted to take her as his wife or concubine, she really could not refuse. Even if she reluctantly refused, it would still be troublesome. Fortunately, she was just being paranoid. Ning Xuemo smiled. Her smile was quite happy as she cheerfully waved her hand at him. Okay, I'll go wash up now. Your Highness, you should rest. Xuemo will not disturb you. She opened the door and was about to leave. Ji Yunhuang glanced at her and suddenly felt that her smile was a little dazzling. He also jumped off the bed. Aren't you afraid of scaring the people in the Crown Prince's residence? That's true. After all, in the eyes of the Crown Prince's residence's attendants, she was taken away by Lord Liu. If she suddenly came out from the Crown Prince's palace, it would probably scare them. She blinked. Then what should I do? Your Highness, go out and order someone to bring in the bathwater. Ji Yunhuang's voice was indifferent. This is my bedroom, not a bathroom. This crown prince was really fussy. Not only did he not allow her to go out, but he also did not allow her to send in the bathwater. He even forced her to take a bath. What was she going to use to bathe? Dry cleaning? Or was it some kind of immortal cleansing spell? Could he be that godly? Ning Xuemo shrugged. Then what does your Highness want me to do? Ji Yunhuang opened the door. This prince will take you there. He took the lead and walked out. Ning Xuemo. She had no choice but to follow him. She had to trouble the crown prince to personally lead the way for her to take a bath. She really had a lot of face. Ever since Ji Yunhuang's return, the crown prince's residence had returned to normal. The maids and imperial bodyguards were busy with their duties. Ji Yunhuang brought her through the crown prince's residence. Along the way, they met many maids and guards. When these people saw Ji Yunhuang's figure from afar, they immediately knelt down and prostrated themselves on the ground, not daring to raise their heads. Only when the two of them passed by did they dare to stand up. Naturally, some people saw Ning Xuemo. Although everyone was surprised, no one dared to talk about it. Of course, no one dared to spread the news out of the crown prince's residence. Back then, the maid who served tea to the sixth prince, Ji Yunhao, was a living example of what would happen to her. After passing through 3 courtyards, 2 corridors, and a pond. Chapter 79. Ning Xuemo was a little puzzled. It was just a bath, was there a need for him to travel so far? Your Highness, the bathhouse in the Crown Prince's residence was built so far away. She quickened her pace and caught up with Ji Yunhuang. It's not a bathhouse, it's a hot spring. You were soaked in sweat just now, so you'll recover faster if you soak in the hot spring. There was a hot spring for her to soak in. Ning Xuemo's eyes lit up. Ever since she came to this continent, she had always bathed in the bathtub. It was only last night in the river. It was not a comfortable bath. She had not soaked in a hot spring for a long time. She followed Ji Yunhuang through another courtyard and arrived in front of a small building. There were 3 big words on the building, Disappearing Earth Spring. There were 4 maids standing in front of the building. When they saw Ji Yunhuang, they bowed. Your Highness. Ji Yunhuang only nodded slightly and walked forward. The 4 maids politely opened the door for him. Your Highness, everything is ready. Ji Yunhuang lifted his feet and walked inside. Ning Xuema naturally followed him. Miss, please wait outside. His Highness does not need anyone to serve him when he's bathing. The four maids stopped her. Ning Xuema raised her eyebrows. Who said that she wanted to serve the crown prince? Before she could say anything, Ji Yunhuang, who had already walked into the building, said without turning his head, "Let her in." Ning Xuema went in. The four maids looked at her back in surprise. Everyone knew that only the crown prince could enjoy the hot spring here. Even if other princes came and wanted to soak in it, they were not allowed to. There was also the crown prince's favorite sister, Ji Yunyao. She wanted to soak in the hot spring and begged the crown prince for a long time, but the crown prince did not agree. What was going on today? Ning Xuema finally saw the hot spring of this continent. When she saw it clearly, the corner of her mouth could not help but twitch. This hot spring, it's so small. The hot spring was round, and the sides of the pool were inlaid with various colored jade stones. The diameter was about 2 meters, and the water was more than 1 meter deep. There was steam rising from the surface of the water. The hot spring looked like a lotus flower bud. At the bottom of the hot spring, there were some round things that looked like pebbles. They looked very colorful and very charming. She tilted her head to observe the situation. Suddenly, she saw Ji Yunhuang taking off his clothes and was startled. His Highness the Crown Prince wants to soak as well. Didn't he say that he was going to soak for her? Ji Yunhuang had already taken off his outer robe. This prince will come here to soak in the water every day. Ning Xuema. This bastard wanted to take a bath with her. She blurted out, "This pool is too small, 2 people won't be able to soak in it." Ji Yunhuang had already rolled up his trousers. Hearing her words, he glanced at her and said, "Do you think that this prince wants to bathe with you? Is that what you're trying to do?" Although Ning Xuema didn't say anything, her expression was clearly that way. In your dreams. The only person who can bathe with this prince is the crown princess. Ji Yunhuang had already stepped into the water barefoot, so his words were not polite at all. Ning Xuema breathed a sigh of relief and smiled. That's good. Fortunately, I'm not your Highness's crown princess. Then your Highness can soak first, I'll come back later. She turned around and walked out. The hot spring belonged to his family, so naturally, he had the final say. Did this prince say to soak first? Ji Yunhuang called out from behind her. Ning Xuema turned around and looked at him. Big brother, you've already entered the water, so why aren't you soaking first? Why is he wearing clothes in the water? Why is he only rolling up his trousers? Watch this prince's actions. The way to soak in this hot spring is somewhat special. If this prince doesn't teach you, I'm afraid that you'll accidentally step on something and be scalded to death. Chapter 80. Ji Yunhuang stepped on the pebbles at the bottom of the hot spring, causing bubbles to appear in the water. Some were white, some were colorless, and some were colorful. These pebbles represent different elements and different temperatures. Your body is currently weak, so you can't step on the black pebbles at the bottom of the water, but you can step on half of the green pebbles. Ji Yunhuang began to teach him how to soak in the hot spring. Ning Xuema's forehead was filled with countless black lines. It was just soaking in the hot spring, why did it feel like soaking in a trap? Wasn't it tiring? You have to step on these stones according to your body's adaptability. You can't be too hasty. Ji Yunhuang taught her by example for a full 2 minutes. Ning Xuema resisted the urge to yawn and nodded. Okay, no problem. She was an expert in traps, so it was not difficult for her to remember these steps. Only then did Ji Yunhuang get out of the water. He glanced at her worriedly. You have to remember what this prince said. Once you feel that something is wrong, immediately get out of the water or call for this prince. This prince will wait for you outside. Ning Xuemo had the urge to rub her eyebrows. It was just soaking in the hot spring, so why did this prince make it seem like she was clearing a mine? She agreed very well, so Ji Yunhuang went out. Ning Xuemo waited for him to go out and closed the door before she began to undress. She knew that although this prince occasionally teased her, he was actually quite proud and upright. He should not be watching this little lowly bathe in the dark. Hot spring, I'm coming. I haven't soaked in you for a long time. The water splashed everywhere. She was already standing in the hot spring, but when she jumped in, she felt that something was wrong. There seemed to be a weak current in the hot spring. The water rippled, and there were countless thin thread-like things that drilled into her body through her skin, causing her to shiver in an instant. What was worse was that half of her body was being drilled into by the warm current, while the other half was being drilled into by the icy current. Half of her body was red, while the other half was white. This hot spring was too strange. Ning Xuemo only felt that the blood in half of her body was boiling, while the blood in the other half of her body was congealing. She hurriedly lowered her head and found that her cold foot was stepping on a black stone. She quickly lifted her cold left foot, only to find that her whole body was burning. He looked down and saw that his right foot had stepped on a fiery red stone. Ji Yunhuang seemed to have said that she could not touch this fiery red stone. She quickly changed her footwork according to Ji Yunhuang's instructions. Once she had completely stabilized herself, she finally felt a lot more comfortable. After soaking for a while, she discovered the great benefits of soaking in this hot spring. The weak electric current in the hot spring seemed to be able to flow through her blood vessels, making her blood flow more smoothly. Not only was the dust on her body washed away, but the trash in her body was also taken away. What was even more amazing was that the temperature of the hot spring varied from time to time. As long as she stepped on the right stone, the hot spring water would automatically adjust according to her body's adaptability. Moreover, due to the stimulation of the water temperature and the weak electric current, the breath in her body would automatically adjust and flow more smoothly. While Ning Xuemo was recuperating her body's functions, she was also practicing the internal strength from her previous life. She didn't care about psychokinesis, but she must have internal strength. This way, her body would be more agile and she would have more ability to protect herself. She had her own set of internal strength training methods, and this small body was also very capable. It was a good seedling for cultivating internal strength. In just a short period of 10 days, her internal strength had already reached 20% of her previous life's level. She estimated that in less than a year, she would be able to recover her previous strength. Even if she couldn't walk unhindered in this continent, she would have no problem protecting herself. Chapter 81. Now that she was in the hot spring, she felt that the inner energy in her body was running vigorously. It was twice as fast as normal cultivation. Ning Xuemo's heart was filled with joy. Naturally, she wouldn't miss this kind of good opportunity to cultivate. In any case, after washing her body, she began to sit in the water and cultivate. Slowly, she calmed her heart and closed her eyes. She was about to cultivate when she suddenly sensed something and opened her eyes. Then, she was stunned. She did not know when, but there was a person sitting and floating in front of her. It was a man that she did not know how to describe. Only his upper body was exposed in the water, but his upper body was already dazzling. His hair was like seaweed wriggling in the water. His skin was like jade, warm and radiant in the water. His long eyelashes were like fans, and his perfectly curved lips were slightly pursed. Under the reflection of the waves, his body seemed to be covered with a faint halo of Buddha's light. The bright moon in the sea has tears, and the warm jade in the blue field gives off smoke. The moment Ning Xuema saw him, the first thing that came to her mind were these two lines of a poem. Then, she was shocked. She resisted the urge to scream. She clenched her fingers in the water and shouted, "Who are you? When did you come in?" The hot spring was so small and so clear that she could see the bottom. If this person was hiding here, it was impossible that she did not know. Then, where did he come from? And he was so quiet that she did not notice him beforehand. The person opposite her still had his eyes closed. He looked lazy and calm, and he seemed to be enjoying himself. Even the posture of his hands did not change. Because the hot spring was too small, the distance between the person and Ning Xuema was less than a foot. Ning Xuema was short. If she did not float in the hot spring, only her head would be exposed. However, the person was half exposed, and he was still sitting. Ning Xuema saw his beautifully curved collarbone and beautiful chin. At such a close distance, she could hear his breathing. The hairs on Ning Xuema's body suddenly stood up. She could not sense the other party's breathing. He was like a perfect jade carving. His chest was obviously moving up and down. "Hey, you." Ning Xuema extended her hand, wanting to pat his shoulder. However, she didn't expect that her palm would pass through his body without a sound. Then, there was a faint flash of light, and the man actually disappeared. Ghost! Ghost! Ning Xuema almost trembled. She stepped on empty air and gulped down a large mouthful of her own bathwater. She quickly stood up and looked again. The surroundings were completely silent. There was no one else around. Did she really see a ghost? No, that person did not give her the feeling of a ghost, but a three-dimensional figure. Could it be a four-dimensional figure? How could there be such an advanced thing in this era? Even in the technologically advanced modern era, it wasn't as realistic as this. Naturally, she had a lot of scientific knowledge. She immediately looked at the corresponding projection area, but she couldn't see any similar equipment. She thought, Yunhuang, Yunxian thought. Or maybe there was a magnetic field here, so the illusion of a person bathing here was unintentionally left behind. She heard that only Yunhuang could come here. Who was this person? Was it Yunhuang's slave? No. This person's aura was not ordinary. Even if Yunhuang's aura was equally strong, it was obvious that he was not on the same level. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.